Hello, friends. This is Mike Williams. I recently had the pleasure of joining Brian Stavely on his Dose of Reality podcast. Brian asked me to join him to talk about my journey in life and to share my thoughts on what it means to seek truth. I hope you enjoy the show and thank you for listening.
All right, everyone. Welcome back to Dose of Reality. This is My Awakening, episode number 47, with Mike Williams from Sage of Quay Radio. Mike, thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Brian.
I'm just going to give everybody a little intro as to what the show is about, and then we'll continue, okay? I know you already know. Okay, everybody, so what I do on this channel, I do all sorts of videos, all sorts of shows, but I have a series called My Awakening, where I like to get other people's story about their journey from pretty much start up until now, the different topics they've been through, how it's affected them, this, that, and the other. So today we will start with Mike. Mike, we'll just start with, we'll just go way, we'll go back about 30 years when you were a kid.
It's longer than that.
Yeah, I know. I wasn't going to do that to you. I caught myself almost saying way back when you were a kid. I'm like, oh, I shouldn't say it like that. When we used to walk uphill to school both ways, barefoot, remember? So as a kid, what was it like for you in school? You have a hard time paying attention? Did you do well? Did you excel? Were you social? What was it like?
I did well in school. I was considered, a good student. I was very reserved. I wasn't a troublemaker or anything like that. But growing up, Brian, from a very early age, I had paranormal experiences.
Oh, good. Let's get into it.
Yeah,
Awesome.
and so that was really the beginning of my awakening to a degree, because even though I obviously didn't know it at the time, when I was a kid, and I like when I was 10 or 11 years old, for about 3 or 4 months, for maybe 3 or 4 days a week, I saw full-bodied apparitions at night when I went to bed, and I saw them clear as day. And this went on, like I said, for 3 or 4 months. And I never said anything. It's really weird, when you're a kid and you see these things or you experience this stuff, you kind of keep it to yourself. And so it started with stuff like that. And, we had two homes growing up on Long Island that had a lot of poltergeist type of activities.
Oh, wow.
And so, when you experience that stuff growing up as a kid, you know that things are a little different, or maybe even a lot different than what
Yeah.
you're being told and taught, right? So when I finally, as a kid, started talking about this stuff, the adults and even, friends and stuff like that would think that maybe you made it up or it's your imagination. But, I didn't make any of that stuff up, and it wasn't my imagination. I know what I saw. Until this day, I'm 61 years old now. And like I said, this happened, the apparitions, back when I was around 10, 11, maybe 12. I still remember them clear as day. I mean, they are
Oh, yeah.
embedded, in my mind.
I went through this very similar thing, and I lived in a very, very haunted house. Here's a little bit what I went through. I'm not going to tell my story, but I had how you said you couldn't really tell anybody. Well, my mother saw the stuff. My father, though, he wouldn't even talk about it. What was it like with the people you lived with?
My mother was very open to it. And my father was the same way. My father would just shut it down. He didn't want to talk about it. Now, that doesn't mean that he didn't experience it. I found out much later on in my life that my father finally acknowledged that he had experienced a couple of very weird things too, but he just shut it down. My brothers and my sister also had the same experiences, so it wasn't just me. So as kids, we might have talked about it a little bit, but as we got older, into our teens and into our 20s, we would sit down as a family and we would talk about the experiences. And the interesting thing was, we were experiencing a lot of the very same types of things. And one of the things I always tell folks is never to play with a Ouija board, ever.
Oh, yeah. I had a terrible experience. What happened with you? You used it in the house that was haunted, and what happened?
Yeah. So it was a house we had on Long Island, and my brother and my sister and I, not my younger brother, because he was too young, but we would break out the Ouija board, and we would sit in the room. We would turn the lights down, uh, and we would ask questions, and the little thing there would start moving. And at first, we would kind of tease each other because I would say to my brother, "Hey, stop pushing the wedge, whatever they call that thing," and he says, "I'm not pushing it." And my sister said the same thing. Well, that thing did move around the board, and here's what happened afterwards. A lot of really kind of, I would say, dark stuff took place. I mean, just a heaviness around the house.
All
Huh?
at once, all at once. So you think it opened something and it continued after that because of the
No,
Ouija board?
it like that was just basically opening the door a little bit, right? So when we were kids and we didn't know, what the heck we were doing. We were teenagers. And so, we would play with the Ouija board every once in a while, and there just was this heaviness that came over the house, and there were some very weird things that took place. When I talk about poltergeisty types of stuff, here's one. I'll just give you an example, right? I would go to bed at night, and I found out later on that my brother and my sister experienced the same thing. I put my head down on the pillow, and as soon as I put my head down on the pillow, I would hear like a party going on. I would hear glasses and
Yep.
silverware and dishes, and I would hear talking and laughing, but you couldn't make it out. And then when I picked my head up, it went away. It just went silent. And then one night, what happened was I heard it, and it was very loud. And this time, when I picked my head up off the pillow, I still heard it. And I thought to myself, geez, mom and dad are having a party downstairs and they didn't tell us.
Mm-hmm.
So I left my bedroom, and I must have been around 16, 17, around there. And as soon as I opened my door to go downstairs, I was expecting to see the whole downstairs of the house lit up and people all over the place. As soon as I turned the corner and looked down the stairs, it was pitch black, nothing. And I was still hearing it. And right now it's like, it still gives me goosebumps. And it was really freaky. It was very scary. And, so it was stuff like that. So going back to the Ouija board, I'm convinced that when you play around with that stuff, you don't know what it is that you can potentially be bringing in. It's like little doorways and little portals, and you're kind of inviting these negative entities and these negative beings into your reality. And so that was that. After that, I threw the Ouija board away, and I never touched one since. And my brother and my sister will talk about it every once in a while, and we all agree that that wasn't a good thing to be toying around with.
Yeah. Well, a couple questions. So I had very similar experiences, Mike, to the point where I used to lay down, put my head down. I would hear the noises, mostly from my attic, which is where a lot of the haunting was. And it was so bad, Mike. I used to bang my face off the pillow and this sounds ridiculous, but to drown the noise out, I used to bang my face off the pillow and make like a humming noise until I was tired and I passed out because I couldn't deal with it no more. Now, we lived in a haunted house, so my mom wanted to look into the history of it, and it turned out it used to be an orphanage and all this. You talk about what sounded like a friggin' banquet downstairs. What type of history was in this place that you lived? You must have looked into it.
I know. I didn't as much. I looked into the degree that on Long Island it was a lot of Indian burial grounds. I don't know if that explains what was going on downstairs, like what you said, the banquet. I don't know about that, but I didn't go into great detail about researching that particular piece of property. The house was fairly new, to be honest with you. So it wasn't a house that went back and it had really any history. So it had to be the grounds itself that had the history. But it was very, very disturbing a lot of times, Brian. And finally, we moved from that house in 1976. And, and then moved on in life. But the time that we were there, it was a number of years. all of us experience that paranormal activity.
Yeah. What about now? Nothing.
No, nothing now, to be honest with you. In the house I'm in right now, when I first moved into this house, there was a little bit of activity. And I would be downstairs and I would hear walking around upstairs. I mean, clear as day, somebody was like walking around. And I had gotten so acclimated to paranormal that after a while, what happens is you don't have that fear factor anymore. You just kind of deal with it, you know?
Yeah.
And so I remember coming upstairs just to check things out and then going back downstairs and it would start again. It's almost like they're playing a little bit of a game, right? They like to see you get up, pay attention. And then as soon as you go to where the noise is, they stop. And then you go back downstairs and they crank it up again, right? This is, at least in my experience, how it works. And I just said out loud, I said, hey, look, I'm not playing this game. You know, go find somebody else to go have fun with and bother. You know, I'm not interested. And that was that. It just kind of went away. And I found a lot of times when you confront it that way, that they will just kind of go someplace else to, you know, to go do whatever it is they like to do to spook us.
How about the fact that these Ouija boards are sold in toy stores? I mean, that's pretty evil thing right there, isn't it? I mean, that's bad.
Yeah, you're playing with the occult and you're playing with magic. And the thing is, you know, you don't know what you're doing, and most people don't.
Especially kids. Kids aren't going to know what the hell they're doing, and they sell
No,
them in Chelmsford and Toys R Us. That's
right.
where I got mine. I bought mine at the Chelmsford Mall at Child World, like just where you would buy a board game.
Yeah. Yep. It's, please, if anybody's playing around with it, don't. That's my recommendation.
Yeah. So you got into your teens, and did you go to more schooling after high school? Did you go to college? Did you go to a trade school, anything like that?
Yeah, you know, we finished high school, went to college. In between college, I was in the Air National Guard. I was a ball player, and I played,
Baseball. Baseball.
yeah, competitive. I played in competitive leagues, softball, and we had some. I'll tell you, in the military, in the National Guard, some great ball players there, and you know, and I used to play third base and some center field. And you know, I continued playing softball. And you know, I did, in the leagues I played in, it was competitive up until about I was 40 years old, and at that point, I had to basically hang up my cleats because you know, some of the guys I was playing with, you know, they're 25 years old, you know, and so it's very difficult to compete when you're 40, even though you're still a good ball player and you're keeping yourself in shape. You know, you can't compete with a 25-year-old. You just can't. So at that point, when I turned 40, I didn't play any ball anymore.
Yeah. So when did you start to question? Well, before I get to that, question in the media and the government, did you buy into like two-party politics and all that for a while?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I was fully on the hamster wheel and in the matrix. And you know, I remember, you know, voting for Ronald Reagan and you know, up all the way up through 9/11, Brian. And even after
Yeah.
9/11, you know, I still believed the official story. And you know, part of the problem is because you just, as a good person, right? And I think of myself as a good person. You don't think in terms of people lying to you and being deceitful. You just
No.
don't. You know, you're thinking that people are going to be honest and truthful. And you know, so yeah, I bought into the two-party system, and then you know, I started to look into things. And one of the first things I started to look at, where I really started to question, was the moon landings.
Nice. What
Yeah,
year? What year did you start to question?
yeah, that was probably around the early 2000s, I would say, the early part of
Okay.
2000s. I started, you know, just kind of looking into it, and you know, because I remember as a kid, we watched the moon landings. My father was, you know, he was ecstatic over it. He thought it was just the greatest thing, and so I remember watching it on television. Going back, you know, to when I was a boy, I think maybe I was in middle school. I read a book on the JFK assassination called, I think it was called Executive Action, and that was a book that kind of whet my appetite with regard to the JFK assassination uh, not being the story that we were told, the mainstream right story.
Mhm.
And so I got very intrigued, by that. And again, that was about middle school. Yeah, but as far as my path and how it's manifested to what I'm doing today, I would say it was the moon landings, and then it was waking up to 9/11,
Mhm.
and then I started to look into things like geoengineering, and I was also very much researching mind control. Mind control always fascinated me, because after you get into this, you realize that this is what all of this is all about. It's all about
Big
mind
psycho
control.
Yeah, it's a big psychological
It
operation. That's
is.
what it's all about.
It everything's a big psyop, and so so what happened was it kind of evolved over time. You look at something, and then that leads you to something else, and then to something
Oh,
else, and so it's a perpetual state of learning, I think.
yeah.
And even today, I mean, I don't claim to know everything. I don't, because you don't
No.
know what you don't know. And the recent thing going back to 2016 was up until that point. I believe the Beatles were the Beatles, and then I got on this path that talked about the replacement of Paul McCartney, and then that led to the whole psychological operation around the Beatles. And that's come late in my life.
Yeah.
So that the point I'm making is, it's really a process of evolving and moving along the timeline, and just figuring more stuff out as you go along.
Oh yeah, it's always evolving. That's why I don't use the term woke, awake. It's a process.
No,
Nobody's
yeah,
awake, and people that go around beating their chest how woke they are. I mean, it's such a joke, honestly. We will back it up a little though. So with the moon landing, one being one of your first big things, what was it about the moon landing that finally made you question it? Was it the shadow issues? Was it the technological impossibilities? I'm sure it was a combination of all things, but what really got you? Oh man, this isn't right. Did you finally like look at the imagery with an open eye, or what was it?
yeah. It was a DVD I bought, and I don't, for the life of me, remember the name of it. But they were talking about the photography and the cameras that they brought on the moon, and then they were showing the anomalies of the shadows and stuff like that, and then seeing that they were using the Stanley Kubrick, where he would have the fake background, right? So the movie set went to a certain point, and then it was a camera technique that Kubrick used, which added further depth to the picture, right, and to the footage. And so when I started looking at that, I thought to myself, okay, all right, something's up here. And that really got the ball rolling on that. And I wasn't even thinking in terms of geocentrism, flat
No.
Earth at that
Yeah.
point. So yeah, so that's what got it started. I got this DVD, and I remember they were interviewing a couple of guys, one main guy, and he was an expert on the camera and
Mhm.
on the photography. And you know, as I listened to it, things started to click, and I remember thinking to myself, well, you know what? I've got to take a little deeper look into this, because this is not what we were told.
At that time, did you think what I thought? It was propaganda to make us seem superior to the Russians and all this. Did you buy into that? Is that what you thought the motive was, like 20 years ago? What did you think the motive was for faking the moon landing back in 2000? I mean,
Yeah, I mean,
20.
I don't, it's interesting. I don't know if I thought about a motive at the time. Um, I thought maybe it was because they were, it was money, right? I thought that if they were able to keep this going, then they were going to be able to siphon off tremendous amounts of money
Oh yeah.
to be able to do whatever it is that they're doing. So when people ask me today about NASA, I tell them, well, first of all, NASA was, founded upon it's a Masonic entity, and they're very heavily into black ops. So when they're taking the money, which is a tremendous amount of money daily, annually, It's certainly not going toward doing anything in space, right? So they're using this technology for other things, uh, to firm up the control apparatus, much like what DARPA does, and so on.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they're certainly not getting all that money to do CGI, right?
Oh my God. Their CGI. I mean, one day's budget could give them their CGI that they give us for a year. I mean, it's so pathetic.
Yeah.
It really is. So when I bought 9/11 hook, line, and sinker, like everybody. Pretty much everybody. I know there are some people that say they knew on the day. I find that hard to believe. There might be. I took it hook, line, and sinker, Mike, and it took me until 2010 to start my journey. Okay, like I said, nobody's awake. I started my journey in 2010, and it happened by we're going to get to the flat earth stuff later, but like the behind the curve and these disinfo things that are put out like on Netflix. Well, they did that for 9/11, obviously. And I saw something on 9/11 called World Trade Center with Nicolas Cage. It gave you a different view than the media, but it was more rabbit trails and stuff. But it got me started on my journey. What made you finally question 9/11 after so many years had passed? And what year was it?
Yeah, that's a good question. So let me just back up a second, and I'll lead into that. So
Absolutely.
there were two moments in my life along my timeline that were part of the awakening process. And it might seem indirect when I explain it, but it did lead to me getting to 9/11. In 2006, I had, some personal challenges that I was working through. And those personal challenges made me have to step back and assess my life and take a look at, where's my life going? I mean, what is this all going to culminate to? Am I just going to keep, running on a treadmill? And so, so I looked in the mirror and I took stock in myself and said, you know what, Mike, you got to make some changes, because current course and speed, this is just going to be a road to nowhere. So you've got to do something, and you've got to make some changes. And then in 2009, I had a spiritual experience, and that was a huge piece of my awakening. And what that did was that put me on a spiritual journey. So I was born and raised Roman Catholic. And I kind of walked away from Catholicism when I was around 17 years old. I was never comfortable with it. I remember going to church and just not being, I don't know, I was never comfortable in church as a kid. It didn't resonate with me.
But did you just had to go because your parents were more
Yeah.
really into it? You
Oh,
had
yeah.
no choice.
Yeah. Yeah. An Irish Italian family. I mean, you don't have a choice. You're going to go to church, right? So then, so then in 2009, I had this awakening, and I had a vision. Okay, I don't normally talk about this, and it was real as real can be. And just to cut to the chase, basically, what I was told was, it's time. And I remember thinking to myself, and well, time for what?
What do you mean
And
you were told? You were told by the vision you had, a spiritual entity
yeah,
told you something, you heard it in your head, or you heard it verbally? And was this the first time? Because we talked about you seeing these things before. Remember you see like outside your room or whatever. Did they
yeah.
ever make any audible noise to you? Did you ever hear them speak
Yeah,
to
all
you
right.
before?
So I'll tell the story. I don't usually tell this story. So what happened was, so I was going to bed at night, and I always tell this story to my close family and friends, my inner circle. I don't usually talk about it publicly like this, but
Well, this is dose to reality, Mike. You don't have a choice. Go ahead.
so I was going to bed, and it's very important to state that I wasn't asleep, and so I had my eyes closed. And for about 3 or 4 weeks, I would say, before this event, I would close my eyes and I would see swirling lights. So swirling white lights, blue lights, sometimes red. And I remember thinking to myself, I had never seen this before when I closed my eyes and I was ready to go to sleep. And I found it very interesting, or it's very intriguing to focus on it. And then what happened was some of these lights they would swirl, and then they would freeze, and then a scene would open up. and I would see people or I would see buildings, and it was off in the distance. I really couldn't make out the people. I couldn't make out the buildings and stuff like this, but the clarity was incredible, even though it appeared to be off in the distance. And then this one night, what happened was this light was coming from the distance, and it was swirling and swirling and swirling. It was getting closer and closer to me, Brian, and then boom, it stopped, and then this face appeared. And it was like illuminating this brilliant, bright white. And the face it had a stoic appearance to it. And it was a man, he had a beard, and he was looking right at me. And again, I wasn't asleep. And it was telepathic. And I remember that there was this sense of euphoria that had come over me. There was this sense of like unconditional love. And he said to me telepathically, "It's time." And I just was like, "What's going on here?" I thought at first that I was in the presence of God, And I said, "Time for what?" And he just said again, "It's time." And then he pulled away and he disappeared. And so, because I wasn't asleep, I got up, and I remember thinking to myself, I was a bit rattled because I was thinking, what was that? What was going on? And so, it took me some time to kind of just get my thoughts collected and just be introspective and reflect back on what just happened. It was very profound. I don't know, some people are going to think this is crazy, but whatever. I mean, it happened. And it was starting at that point that things changed for me drastically in my life. I started thinking in different ways. I became very interested in different topics that had to do with metaphysics.
Like what?
I was, I knew about metaphysics. I knew what it meant. I knew the definition, but I wasn't practicing metaphysics. I wasn't, openly practicing spiritual types of techniques. And that's when it began, and we talked before the show that I'm a hypnotherapist, and that's when I started to get into more of hypnosis and the benefits of hypnosis and hypnotherapy. And so, I'd gone to my own past life regression back in 2009 after reading a book, the Memoirs of Billy Shears.
Yeah, you can't get that out of your head, dude.
Scratch that. Memories of the Afterlife by Michael Newton. And I didn't know anything about Michael Newton, but Michael Newton had done tremendous amounts of work in the area of spiritual regression. So I was on Amazon and I was looking for books actually on near-death experience. I always found NDEs to be very, very intriguing. And Amazon says, "Hey, you might like this." And it was a pre-order, and it was the book, Memories of the Afterlife by Michael Newton. So I ordered the book, and the book came about, 2 or 3 weeks later. It took me about 3 days to read the entire book. It's 32 case studies of past life regression that people who are trained in Michael Newton's techniques submitted, and they took the best of the best. And the book blew me away. Absolutely blew me away. And it was after I read that book, I thought to myself, I have to have one of those sessions. Mm-hmm. And so I did. And so that was in the fall of 2009. And right after I had the sessions, I had 2 sessions. It was a past life and it was a between lives session. A between lives is when you go into very deep trance and you get to experience your life in the spirit world in between your incarnations. So it's life in the spirit world. My sessions were very profound. And after that, I decided that I was going to go train and get certified in this work. And I did. Uh-huh. And so it's been 10 years going now. So that was the beginning of of my awakening, because that spiritual piece of it was huge. So the 2006 piece was, hey, take stock in yourself. The 2009 piece was, hey, you've got to pay a lot more attention to the spiritual aspects of your existence and your reality. It's not all this physical world. Physical world is something you experience that helps you to develop and your spirit, your soul, right? Your soul needs its development in order for the soul to ascend.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was that spiritual awakening that then led me into things like watching DVDs like 9/11 Mysteries,
Sure.
uh, DVDs like that. Loose Change, I think, was another one,
Yeah,
right? So I
there's
started watching this stuff, and I was watching it now with like this open mind that I really didn't have before. I mean, previous to these experiences I had, I would have paid no attention to any of this stuff, and all of a sudden everything opened up. It was like the curtain was pulled aside, and I was given an opportunity to look behind the curtain. And so, that was that. And then I started the blog back in April of 2012. So the blog is, almost 8 years old. I released my first album, Leaving Dystopia, in February of 2012.
So did this spiritual journey spark creativity in you to make music? Because I feel that that's done that to a lot of people. Were you already making music?
Well, no, I was a guitar player and, and a musician for, I started playing guitar when I was 15 years old. But what happened was in 2011, I just got this sense that, hey, you've got to go put this album together. Go write some music and put this album together. It's something you've always wanted to do. You wanted to put an album out. Let's go do it. And so I spent a year, sitting down and writing and recording so that I could release the album in 2012, Leaving Dystopia. So yes, I would say that the spiritual awakening that I had in 2009 was
Mm-hmm.
definitely a catalyst that led to me doing this,
Yeah.
and then I released Hollow Moon, my second album, in February of 2018, so 6 years later. But yeah, so this is what I'm trying to say. I know it might seem like it's a little, kind of scattered, but it's been like think of stairs, right? So you take one step and the second step and the third step and the fourth step, and all of these things are, they're prerequisites to the next experience you're going to have or the next set of awakening that you're going to have.
Yeah.
So that's basically it, Brian. That's how I got into it. I started watching 9/11 DVDs, which,
Yeah.
I mean, if somebody said to me, what made you do that? I can't even answer that question. I just started watching them,
Yeah.
and
Well,
and it just kind of rolled out.
before we get more into 9/11 and move forward, I'm going to back you up again. You did mention something that you didn't gloss over, but we didn't spend a lot of time on it, and something people in this area of my channel, at least, are very interested in. And you mentioned near-death experiences. Have you
Yeah.
had one? Have you
No,
had?
but I had a friend of mine who had one when he was 12 years old, and this was going back to when I was in the corporate world, and we went out for a drink or two after work, and he said to me, Mike, I know that you're very open to this stuff, and he says, and I don't talk about it, but he had an NDE when he was 12, and he explained the entire experience, and it was unbelievable. And it maps to what many people say an NDE is all about. You leave the body, you float to the top of the to the room, you're watching, you can drift from room to room. He said that he can see himself on the table, he can hear the doctors, he can see them working on him, trying to revive him. He was able to float out into the next room where his family was, and he can see his mom and dad, and they were very emotional and very concerned, obviously, because he was only 12.
Wow.
So and then I would watch shows, I would try to catch documentaries on NDEs, because I knew that there was something to it, because there is an afterlife. This is not it, folks. It really isn't, and after 10 years of doing past life regressions, Brian, and spiritual regressions, I can tell you that they map very closely, if not exactly, to NDEs. And there is a process. There is a process when you cross over, when you die. It's not this haphazard way of finding your way to the spirit world. There's a very systematic approach to how it works.
Yeah. So we talked earlier about the media and the government, and you said you just didn't think that people would lie to you, and that's kind of a lesson that you learned. Now we're going to get to 9/11. This is important because you watch all these documentaries. I did the same. I'm sure a lot of people here went through these same roads, and you go through people like Alex Jones and these other people, and then you realize that even when you get to this truth journey, there's a whole nother layer of people that you think are giving you truth that are actually lying to you. And that's even really hard to comprehend, because it's like, we'll use Alex Jones for an example because everybody knows who he is. You got a guy out there with a bullhorn screaming 9/11's an inside job, this, that, and the other. You're like, this is awesome. This is awesome. And then, it took me a few months to realize what was really going on here. What brought you to the realization that a lot of these people that were putting out some of the information had a different agenda, and how did you get past that? And we don't have to sit here and name names or anything, but there's a lot of them,
No, I mean,
what did you realize?
the two people that I cut my teeth on initially was InfoWars and David Icke. Okay. I stopped listening to InfoWars a number of years ago. Now, I will say this, that InfoWars, when I started listening, was bringing a lot of good stuff to the table, right? They were talking about 9/11 being an inside job. They were talking about vaccines. They were talking about geoengineering. They were talking about the police state. So there was a lot of truth that was coming out of InfoWars going back years ago. Then I saw that with the election, when Trump was running, that they like a switch was thrown. And I don't know whether, Alex Jones was overtly compromised, but his narrative was completely commandeered, and he just went to the left-right paradigm, right?
Well, yeah, they're trying to tell you to get rid of the government, and then they're pulling you back into the left-right.
Exactly. So, but I pay no attention to InfoWars these days. I haven't for the last 2 or 3 years or so. David Icke, I still think David does, good work. His narrative hasn't changed much, but he's still the thing I appreciate about David is that he was one of the very few to talk about Zionism openly. Okay, his biggest mistake was when he was talking about the archons and stuff like that, And I'm not saying that parasitical entities and stuff like that don't exist. Sometimes there are some things that when you put it out there, even though I can understand conceptually what he's talking about, you box yourself in. Reptilians, right? I mean, I said the archons, but he later morphed the reptilians into the archons. But when you start talking about reptilians and stuff like that, I don't know. Do reptilians exist? I honestly, I have no idea. But when you put that out there, you really kind of shackle yourself. And that's something that I think that to this day, that's a cross that David has to bear. But that being said, there is an enormous amount of information that David Icke has brought forth that is, to this day, is extremely relevant, and groundbreaking, in my opinion. So, but those are two guys that I, like I said, I cut my teeth on. I don't pay much attention to either one today. Every once in a while, I might put one of David's, 15 or 20-minute podcasts up on the blog. But I mean, I started realizing that not just like Alex Jones, but many others in the truth community, that they were not what they were telling us they were.
No,
right?
not
Right. And
especially in 9/11. Oh my God.
yeah.
And I'm not get into my stories, but I've dealt with so much.
And the problem, Brian, is like when people talk about, they say, oh, I'm a truther. What does that mean? It's like hope and change, right? What does that mean? It's open-ended. You interpret it any way that, you want to interpret it. People fill in the blanks. So, there are people who call themselves truthers who are still still in that left-right paradigm.
Unbelievable. It's crazy to me.
You
I
know,
mean, there's people that flat earthers that are in the left right, which really, and we'll get to flat earth later. But I mean, yeah, the people that are still into the left right, it's crazy. And another thing, Mike, too, is these a lot of the truth is, and a lot of them aren't doing it. They're not doing it on purpose, but so many people are just quick to see the latest fear porn from somebody like Alex Jones and just share it all over the media and share it and never use any discernment. And I'm not saying there's not things to be fearful of in the world, but they don't use any discernment and they just share it, and that's become a big problem for me.
Look, the problem that we have in the alternative research community, everybody wants to have a critical mass, right? There's never going to be a critical mass. And one of the things I've learned, having done this for as long as I have, Brian, is that everybody's all over the place with their belief systems. You'll hear people say, well, my truth is. And my response back to that type of comment is that when you say my truth is, that's a perspective. That's not a truth. Truth is binary. It's true or false. It's on or off. So, people are all over the place as far as what they believe is the truth. And, so we will be in a constant battle, even amongst those of us that are in the truth community, about what people believe is the main area of alternative research that we need to focus on, right? I always love that one. People say, oh, no, you're wasting your time doing this, or you're wasting your time talking about that. You should be talking about this. You should be talking about that.
Yep.
I've had people say to me things like, well, don't you think that, this is the most important truther alternative research topic, like flat earth as an example. I was asked that question specifically, right? And I said, no, I don't. And they said, well, you don't? I said, no. I said, go talk to a parent who has a vaccine injured child.
Yeah.
They don't give a flying flip about the shape of the earth when they've got to deal with a child that's vaccine injured. Okay. So the big thing that we have to realize, or at least this is how I come from it, I come at it, is that this is an individual journey. Okay. This is not about Mike trying to be the Pied Piper and trying to lead a parade. This, first and foremost, when you come into this life, when you incarnate into this life, you come down with a lesson plan, and you're here to learn those lessons. And you've got to do that from an individual perspective. It is individual life experiences that build your character and that ultimately build to the further development of your soul. That is what this is all about. You see, that's why the controllers don't want individuality. That's why, when you think about it, they want everything to be community-oriented, communal, right? It takes a village, right? Hillary Clinton said that, to raise a child. No, it does not, okay? Now, I'm not saying that we shouldn't have community types of activity, that we shouldn't be working together to help each other. But here's the thing. The community is only as strong as each individual. So if each individual is strong and brings character traits and strengths to the table and expertise and skills, and everybody has their area of expertise where they excel at, then that's going to be a very, very strong community. But what the controlling apparatus has done is that they have taken away the individual aspirations. They don't want you doing that. They want everybody leaning on the next person, but no one really has any expertise in anything. Nobody's really overly smart in anything, right? I'm just generally speaking. So what happens is that the whole community piece of it it's not strong, right? That's why back in the day when we did have, tribes and such, certain people in the tribe were good at herbal medicine. Others were experts at hunting. Others were good at farming the land. And then everybody had a role, but whatever role they had, they were really good at. And so that fostered a very, very strong tribe, a very strong connection to the community, But in order to have that, you have to develop yourself individually. And that's why when people say to me, like, I do the Beatles stuff, right? And I get comments all the time. I don't believe that. I don't believe this. I'm like, I don't care what you believe. And I'm not trying to be flip about it, right? Because I know that, and I've been around long enough to know that people are going to believe what people want to believe. All I'm doing when I do my work is to put my information out there, my research and my findings. If it resonates with you, great. If it doesn't resonate with you, that's great too. I'm not trying to convince anybody of anything. All I'm doing is I'm doing research. I'm looking into things. I publish it on YouTube, on my social media platforms, and I put it out there. And then I go back to doing more research or doing whatever it is I'm doing in life. I am not trying to convince people to think like Mike. It's impossible, Brian. Even within the 9/11 truther community, right? There was a period of time where they were beating each other over the head because they were disagreeing on, was it nanothermite? Was it nukes? Was it this? Was it that? And here you have a community which really, at the end of the day, has a common goal. But as they're trying to make their way down the field, they're pummeling each other. And we have the same thing in all of the areas that we take a look at, you know?
And the controllers know that, and that's why they put out all these rabbit trails with each conspiracy, because they want to split everybody in all these different directions and get them arguing with each other, in my opinion.
Yes, that's right. It's all divide and conquer. See, the thing is, the controllers are very, very good at understanding. They're experts at understanding the human psychology. They know what motivates us. They know what does not motivate us. They know how to put incentives out there. They know how to dangle the carrot and make you go follow the carrot, chase the carrot. They know how to do these things. And one of the reasons why they do what they do is because reality is created by your consciousness, right?
Yep.
So the collective thought, your thoughts create reality. And for anybody that doubts that, look at anything that in your room, like in the back here in my room, you see guitars, you see amplifiers and stuff like that. You see a piano. Oh, the piano's over here. I got myself reversed here. But my point being is a guitar only came into play because somebody thought about what a guitar should look like and sound like. A piano, somebody had to come to a thought process about creating a piano. So everything in reality is created by thought. So what the controllers do is they control your thought. And when they control your thought, they're controlling your consciousness. And that is energy, enormous amounts of energy in our consciousness. People don't think it's so, right? You can call it chi, you can call it prana, you can call it universal life force, whatever it is you want to call it, the ether. It exists. So they know how to manipulate it. And by manipulating it, they're then able to steer us in a direction that achieves their goals and their objectives. And that's why it's very important to come to an awakening and to understand that this is what's going on, and to start thinking for yourself, to be a critical thinker and a free thinker, and start to push back. You know, and everybody's going to be at a different level, right? Some people are just getting started with awakening. Some people are never going to awake. And then you have, people in the intermediate phases and people in advanced phases and stuff like that. That's the thing, the world, the reality that we live in, there's many, many degrees of where people are at with their understanding of what reality really is.
Yeah, absolutely. You brought up you hit a point that exactly the way I explain it about the vaccine engine mother. I tell people this all the time, and it's like, because there's a lot of people in these communities, like we were talking about, oh, this is the ultimate truth. This is the ultimate truth, and really, dude, they're all pieces to the puzzle.
Right.
And in reality, and on the grand scope of things, we don't know shit, Mike. We have a lot more to learn. And the example you gave is exactly what I tell people. I'm like, you're gonna go and tell somebody somebody that's a mother that's really busy, whose kid got injured by some sort of medical fraud or vaccine, that instead of researching that, put that aside, put aside your research into big pharma and all that, and you need to look at the shape of the earth, and that's what's most important to you. That doesn't make any sense. And I have the same problem with religious, the way people, not going at religion, but the way people will say, oh, well, this is the only way to God. This is the only way to go. It's like, wow, that's quite a ridiculous statement. You're going to tell me what's my path to spirituality, my path to the creator is, and I have to go through the same road as you? Who are you to lead me on that journey?
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't want to get into too much about the religion because it's it's a dividing type of discussion. But look, religion divides. I mean, plain and simple, it does, right? And I know there are going to be people listening to this that are going to disagree, but it does. and it was designed to do that. What the controllers did was, and this control has gone back, for thousands and thousands of years. They replaced spirituality with religion, and religion and spirituality are not synonymous.
No,
Okay,
not at all.
spirituality comes from within you. You don't need middlemen. You don't need people to interpret for you what it is that the creator, God, or source is expecting or looking for, or whatever. So they put religion in place in order to fence it off, and then tell you that if you are this religion or that religion, then that's your spirituality. So it's another control mechanism. All right, and I
Oh,
probably just
absolutely.
pissed a lot of people off, but it is.
No, you're not going at any specific religion or anything. You're talking the truth, man. And I say this all the time on this channel. And in fact, when I first got in, and we're going to get to flat Earth and all that after, we have a couple more topics to talk about before that. But when I first got into the flat Earth stuff, I made everybody makes mistakes, right? But I used to say, oh, well, it's science versus religion. Well, that's absolutely not what it is. It's mainstream science and mainstream religion, organized religion, hand in hand, doing the same thing to you, putting themselves between you and the creator. That's exactly what they're doing, in my opinion.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. Well,
That
go ahead.
no, I was going to say, because this journey that we're on, most people think in terms of the physical world only, but the thing is, this journey is about physical and it's about spiritual. So the analogy that I use is, the football field's 100 yards, and so 50 yards of it is the physical experience and the physical reality, and the other 50 yards is the spiritual awareness and the spiritual awakening, and we're supposed to balance that. Okay, we're supposed to have balance, but most people, they don't spend any time on the 50 yards that contain the spiritual experiences. They really invest heavily into the physical piece of this thing, and many people in the truth community, that's their issue, right? Their issue is that everything is about the physical piece of this thing, changing the physical world, changing the physical reality. When the point I'm trying to make is that when you do that, your scale is like lopsided. Okay, here's where I come from with this. This physical reality will change when Mother Earth goes through her cycles, right? So I subscribe to, we have the Iron Age, the Bronze, the Silver, and the Gold. Everything has cycles. Our life is a cycle. We're born, we live, we die. We have the 4 seasons. Everything has a cycle. Nature, everything goes through cycles. Earth is no different. So we happen to be in an age right now, the Iron Age, where it's just loaded up with lies and deception, and it is also disconnecting you from source. That's what the Iron Age does. It disconnects you from source, from creator, from God. And it's showing you, it's teaching you what it's like not to have that connection. And then you have to say to yourself, how do you like a reality or a life or an experience where you're disconnected from the divine? Well, that's not so good, right? So you have to balance it, and too many truthers, too many people in the alternative research don't do that. They only play on half the field. And so what happens when you only play on half the field is you formulate a doom and gloom narrative. Everything is negative. Everything is bad. Everything is evil. There's just going to be misery down the line unless we all wake up and all that stuff. You know exactly what I'm talking about, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, I deal with these people trapped in the physical so much, and obviously, and we'll get to Mandela effect later on too.
Yeah.
But talking about that with people are so trapped in the physical. Even people in all these different communities that that they're affected, they would get it. But if they can't prove it with science or an equation, to them it doesn't exist, and it's like, well, why don't you just go back to the globe? I mean, because isn't that what we're learning here? That there's a spiritual journey happening, that there's a creator and all this. But then on the other hand, oh, well, these things can't change in reality, or these near-death experiences can't be real, or the ghosts you're seeing can't be real, Mike, because I can't put that down in an equation. Just go work for NASA then.
Right.
I mean, that's how I feel about it.
The thing is, you have to have the spiritual piece of it in order to really understand and assess what's going on with the physical world, right? You have to have the higher perspective. You have to see this is a school, okay? This is a school where we learn. That's what this is all about. And once you understand that, then you can see it for what it is. And when you when you see the physical world or you experience the physical world, you don't have that fear factor. You don't have that doom and gloom. I don't. I look at this as the things that I've learned in the physical world have helped me to avoid the traps of the physical world.
Mm-hmm.
Like I mentioned on a show I did with Owen Benjamin, right?
Mm-hmm.
Number one was get yourself out from under the debt machine. That's number one, right? That's one of their biggest aces up their sleeve is to keep you in debt.
Mm-hmm.
Get out from under that. Turn the television off.
They actually have you strive to get in debt. People strive to get in debt, like to go get student loans and go rack up these credit, and they think that's great. They think it's unbelievable.
Right. That's the conditioning. That's mind control. You're believing that you need to go do these things in order to have material things in your life. Right. That's what I'm saying. When you're over invested in the physical world, that's what you do. You get yourself in debt. You're chasing all these material possessions that you think you need. Right. You need a 4,000 or 5,000 square foot home. You need this car. You need that car. You need a much bigger TV. Your phone has to be this and that, and so on and so on and so on and so on. You're in a trap. You've got yourself trapped, right? So the spiritual piece of it, when you connect, you can see it for what it is, right? And then when you see it for what it is, you can live a lot better life. And the thing is, I always tell folks, people say, "Oh, Mike, you get into some heavy stuff, and how does it make you feel?" I'm okay with it because, as I mentioned, I take the information I have and I try to fit it so that I live my life better. I live a happier life. And the thing is, we need to spend time with our family and our friends. Okay. And there's a lot of good in the world. There's a lot of love in the world. But what we're shown, if you put that stupid TV on all the time, you would never think anything good ever happens in the world.
Nope.
But good happens in the world all the time. And so those are the things that I focus on. I see a lot of people doing a lot of good. And I'm not talking about people in the truth community or the alternative research community or have YouTube channels. I'm talking about everyday people that are doing good things. They're good family people. They're taking good care of their children and so on. People who are caring for animals.
Yep.
And those are the things that we need to focus on. And we need to get away from the fear machine. I mean, this doom and gloom stuff that is constantly pumped into our living rooms. And by the way, that is also pumped into people's heads by the so-called truth community. Many truthers are in the doom and gloom game.
Absolutely. That's one of my biggest problems, especially, a lot of these channels with tons of subs and stuff. That's how they do it. They just push fear. And they don't even care if it's true or not when they put it out because it's going to scare people and they're going to watch. And I think that's absolutely crazy. And the other thing too about the TV, I mean, we could talk about the TV and how demonic it is and all this, but I use this example a lot. It's like the TV makes you think that, okay, this Muslim guy is going to blow me up down the street. My Puerto Rican neighbor is going to steal this off me. My black friend's going to rob this off me. But in reality, if I walked over to any one of my neighbors right now and introduced myself and shook their hand, we'd probably have a cookout tomorrow because they're good, decent people. But that's what they don't want you to know. And they play you off. It's all division, Mike. The control goes hand in hand with the division. That's how they do it. They divide us with the politics. They divide us with the religion. They divide us with the so-called different races when in reality, we're all one human race. We just look different because where we grew up and the climate and the food and everything. Yeah. Yeah.
The bodies that we have, the color of our skin, I mean, that's just a vehicle. That's it, And the only reason why we have war is because the controllers put war into play and they condition people to believe that war is required. Look, the average person, no matter what country you go to, whatever geography, all they want to do is to live their life. They just want to live in peace. They want to be able to make a living. They want to be able to keep food and shelter, right?
Take care of their family.
Take care of their families. Right.
Spend time with their family.
That's
everything
it.
Break that up. The way they have you sit in school all day, the way they try and raise the rent and everything. So both parents and the family have to work and there is no family structure. That's all by design, dude.
Right. That's right. And so when we think in terms of the most people in the world, like 99.99% of the folks, no matter where they are, want what we want. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Just to be left alone, live in peace, be able to make a decent living, raise a family, and have as happy a life as we can possibly have. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
The controllers, right? Because the controllers have their controlling mechanisms in each geography, each country. They fester, right? They foster this this hatred and this ignorance that so many people live with. Oh, I hate Muslims. You know, these Muslim people. You know, oh, the Russians. It's unbelievable to me. It's just unbelievable to me. It's you know it. But like I said before, you know, this is what we're dealing with, and everybody's at a different level of awakening. And like I said, some people will never awaken. You're not in our lifetime, and so it's you know it's part of the dynamic of being here. But you know, the truth is killing, murder, war. Okay, that is not innate to a human being. It is not. Okay, so if we didn't have the controllers, it'd be a better place.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, can we take 5 minutes, get a
Yeah.
coffee, back, and come right back?
Okay.
All right, cool. I'm going to play a quick song, guys. We'll be right back. You'll listen to The Dose of Reality, My Awakening, episode 47, Mike Williams. And I'll be back in less than 5 minutes, guys. I'm not taking a smoke break. Just going to the bathroom and getting a coffee. Be right back. All right, everyone. Welcome back to Dose of Reality. Thank you for sticking with us during that brief break. And let me just get my cameras back situated. There we go. All right, cool. Thanks, Mike. I needed a coffee. Sorry. And I
Yeah,
had
no
to
problem, Brian.
yeah, I don't have anything to smoke, but usually I take a break anyways every top of the hour. Before we go forward from 9/11 into all these other topics we know we're headed towards, some stuff people usually notice very early on, and it's kind of pushed down their throat, I think, in my opinion, is chemtrails. What's your opinion on chemtrails when you first heard about them, and tell us when that was, and if your opinion's changed on them, what is it now?
Well, chemtrails, I noticed years ago. And initially, you know, I was looking into and thinking that it was about, you know, the particulates, that strontium and barium and so on, the aluminum.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you know, I started to shift my my thinking on it
Mm-hmm.
because I started to realize that I'm going back, you know, a while now, a few years ago, that they were always putting the chemtrails in front of the sun. They're always blocking the sun, you
Yeah.
know. So I mean, even when I looked at the rest of the sky, right, it always seemed to me like the first order of business was to chemtrail in front of the sun, and then they would get to the rest of the sky. So I think what they're doing is that you know the sun emits electromagnetic frequency, right, and it's
Mm-hmm.
very key to our existence. We have a resonance with the sun. So I'm thinking more in terms now that what they're doing is they're disrupting that electromagnetic frequency between the sun and us. That's
Exactly.
what I think is possible. Now, that's not to say that they don't have other stuff in the aerosols. I'm not saying that at all. In fact, when people keep talking about forced vaccines and stuff like that, one of my responses has always been, well, I mean, they don't really have to force vaccine anybody. They could just put it in the aerosols, and you're going to breathe it in. I mean, that's one way in which they can get that piece of the agenda done, if that's indeed part of their agenda. But I do think, Brian, I lean more toward now that there's something going on frequency wise.
I exactly. You've probably heard my theories on it, but for those that don't or that might watch this later, I believe basically the same thing. I went through the same journey, and in fact, with chemtrails, I got introduced when I first started looking at 9/11. Everything hit me at once. It was definitely put out there for you to, in my opinion, it's put out there for you for fear. But at the same time, I'm not saying chemtrails are good for you. I'm not saying there aren't bad side effects. I do believe it's to mask out the sun, possibly celestial events in the sky that would expose a little bit more of what this realm is. And what I've been telling people, especially through my Mandela effect journey, my chemtrail theory has evolved more, where I think literally what they're putting in the air is impeding the frequencies that we use on our collective consciousness to connect with each other, to connect with the sun, maybe the creator, the moon, whatever else. I think that's really what they're doing. I think we're pretty much on the same, very similar mindset there.
Yeah,
I like
that's pretty much where I'm at with it. And I'm not going to also discount the fact that they are also controlling the weather through the aerosol spraying. That's very obvious because the other day we had a really beautiful day here in North Carolina, and so myself and my lady, we went out. We go for a walk at the local park, just to get some cardio in. And so I said, "Hey, hon, look at the sky." And she goes, "Yeah, I know, Mike." She says, "So tomorrow we're going to have a cloudy day." And lo and behold, that's what happens. You start to pick up the patterns of their spraying and what it's going to mean weather-wise the next day, as an example, if you pay attention to it. And there's a lot of people that don't pay attention to it, right? They have no idea what's going on in the sky. In fact, it's interesting. I was watching a couple of old movies. I watched Steve McQueen in Bullet, which goes back to 1967. And then I watched an old James Garner movie last night that had to do with him playing Wyatt Earp. And that was from 1968. And you know what they did, Brian, and I know you're familiar with this, is even though these movies are about 40 years old or 45 years old, they had certain scenes where they put the chemtrails in the sky.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So I will be watching the movie, and there'll be a scene and the sky is pristine blue. And then they had moments within each of these movies where it was very clear that they chemtrailed the sky, the background. And I found that fascinating because I thought to myself, geez, they're going back to movies that are 45, 50 years ago, and they're doing this.
Yeah.
So, I mean, just the point I wanted to make.
It is crazy. And, we talked a little bit earlier about the, being stuck in the physical. This is a problem I had, and we'll get to a lot more of that. And it's the problem I've had with a lot of people. I kind of believe that the chemtrail thing is kind of like that because we know these people are psychological masters, right? They know how we think. And I think if you look at it like this way, and you have all the truthers running out saying, "Oh, these chemtrails are here to kill you, kill you, kill you." They don't want to kill us. They want to control us, okay? I'm not saying they want us to live long, healthy lives. I do believe they don't want us to live too long because we can pass on firsthand knowledge. It's harder for them to, rewrite history and everything. If we can get firsthand knowledge from my grandparents who are 100 years old, that doesn't happen anymore. But I do feel it's like this. It's like you will have all the truthers, running out, pushing the fear with it. It's here to kill you. It's here to kill you. It's here to kill you. Then you'll have all the normies, contrails. So you got contrails versus chemtrails, but nobody's looking at the spiritual aspect of it at all. It's completely ignored. Would you agree with that?
Yep. And it's funny. I mean, I did shows going back a number of years ago where I talked about, the chemtrails and being the thing that's going to kill us, the slow kill. That's what it was being referred to, right? The slow kill. And I did shows on that. I had guests on that talked about that. So, that's where I was at that point in time. I was believing that that's possibly what it was about. But I agree with you, Brian. I believe today it's more about interrupting those frequencies and interfering with the consciousness, and that consciousness awakening and having a more spiritual awareness. That's where I believe it's at.
Yeah. Well, while we're still on chemtrails, yes, we're going to get a little crazier for people, and something I've talked about here and there, maybe not here and there, maybe a little more often than not. What do you think about the method of delivery of what we're seeing? Because I've seen some things that certainly don't look like real planes. I think there's possibilities. It's spiritual things that are leaving these chemtrails. I've seen orbs turn into planes. I've seen planes that appear holographic in nature leaving these things. I don't think it's human. What do you think? Because I don't. Now, let me just preface it with this, people. We always talk about these things like Sandy Hook and these other things. I won't go too deep into that for obvious reasons, but it's like, well, how could somebody just walk into a school and do that, blah, blah, blah? Well, it's because nobody could. Nobody does do that. How could a pilot willingly do that and spray all these people? I don't know if human pilots are doing it, but what is your opinion on chemtrails, of how the method of delivery is done?
I think that most of the planes are drones. And, I have these great binoculars. And I spent some time going back about, I don't know, maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago, And I would sit outside on my deck, and I would take a look at these planes. And what I noticed was these most of these planes did not have any windows,
No.
so they were not, passenger planes.
Hmm.
It's not to say that passenger planes aren't spraying, but I think that the the magnitude of what they're doing, um, and the consistency of it, and the flight patterns, because many of these planes are not flying flight patterns that are commercial airline patterns, right?
No, most of the ones when you look at a lot of the spraying, they're not even listed on the flight tracking.
Right, that's right. So I believe that the military drones, and I have seen planes that they do appear to be holographic in nature.
Hmm.
It's hard to say because sometimes when planes are that far away, uh, with the atmosphere,
Hmm.
you can get, you know, uh, the visual can get a little goofy, but I don't know. I don't know about the holographic piece of it. I had a good friend of mine say that he actually saw an orb, like you had just mentioned. It
Yep.
wasn't a plane; it was an orb
Nope.
that was leaving the trails. And this is a very good friend of mine, a good guy, and he's up on Long Island. He saw this on Long Island in New York. So, I mean, I don't know. I mean, the technology that they have is beyond what anybody really thinks they know. And that's the thing we have to understand. We were talking before about the moon landings, and I said, well, where's the money going? Right, the money's going to things like this, in my opinion. Technology that they have is just unbelievable. And so, I mean, I wouldn't rule out
Yeah.
uh, anything, to be honest with you. But if I had just to take it from a logical perspective, um, something I can feel and touch, I'm convinced that they are drones, military drones.
Cool. Awesome. All right. So after chemtrails and 9/11, any other topics you got big into before you started questioning the place that you live, like the planet plane? What else
Well,
came
yeah,
between?
we got into vaccines. Got
How
into
deep?
pretty deep. I had a lady on the show going back maybe 2 or 3 years ago, and we talked about vaccines, and so I mean, I got pretty much into it, and then we talked about I got into aspartame, and like I said, mind control. Mind control was a big one for me, and I had a lady on, Elisa E, who was a former MK Ultra victim, and she was on for a few shows, and we got into that, and I covered a lot of ground with a lot of stuff. I got into just about everything that was in the truth community. There's certain things I didn't touch. Um, I had somebody contact me. They wanted me to do shows on the pedophilia coming out of the Vatican, and you know there's just some things that you're aware that stuff is out there. You know what's going on, but you also have to be very careful when you put yourself out there as a public face about talking about certain things, because bad things can happen. So I opted out of that one, to be honest with you. Although I would put information about those types of things up on the blog. So I posted to the blog. It's not like I avoided it completely, but and sometimes some things are just so dark that I don't personally feel comfortable talking about them, Brian. There's just such a dark energy, heaviness to it that it's just not something that I really want to wrap my arms around, or to talk about. Some people might not like that. They say, "Oh, you should talk about everything," but that's just not how I go at it.
Yeah. What else? What else before you got into the flat Earth topic did you look at a lot?
Oh boy, like I said, just a bunch of stuff. So there was the moon landing, there's vaccines, there's aspartame, there's mind control. Uh, I don't know. I got into well, obviously geoengineering.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, and then the whole flat Earth thing was in 2015.
What happened? Tell us when you first came across the topic, what you thought. Did you fight it? Did you? I know you probably didn't attack people. I couldn't imagine you doing that. A lot of people do get that triggered and attack people, but
No,
what
yeah.
what happened? I couldn't imagine you doing that. But what happened? What did you see? Did a documentary pop up? Was it something subliminal? Did somebody give you a message? Hey, check this out, Mike. What happened?
Well, it was a feed that I got in YouTube, and I really can't remember the details, but I think it was Sargent's Flat Earth Clues or something. Is that what it was called?
Yeah.
And so I'm looking at it. I'm thinking to myself, "Oh, this is ridiculous. It's total nonsense." I mean, I believe the Earth was a globe. you know,
Yeah.
that's what we were indoctrinated with since the day we were born.
Mm-hmm.
But there was this little voice in my head that was saying, "Oh, take a look at it, Mike. Take a look." So I did, and I found it interesting, intriguing. I can't say that at the time I bought it hook, line, and sinker
Mm-hmm.
because I wanted to learn more about it. So that put me on a path to learn more about it. And as I did, what I realized was not so much about what I had to learn about the flat Earth, which I did, geocentrism. It's what I really didn't know about the heliocentric model that came into my awareness. So in other words, I realized what I was not taught in school. And so that's, that kind of opened it up. And so I had a bunch of folks on the show, David Weiss on the show. I had Jaron on the show. I had Dubé on the show early on. Mark Sargent, I think, was my first guest I had on the show going back to 2015 on Flat Earth. And I did a couple of shows with Patricia, although some of the shows that Patricia and I did didn't have anything to do with Flat Earth. But, so I had people on. I was not a Flat Earth researcher per se. I was more of a radio host talking to people who did Flat Earth research.
Sure.
But I was doing my own on the side, and that's how I got into it. And then ultimately what happened was I got into Martin Kenny's work, the cosmic egg and syncretism. And the syncretism I knew about because I was listening to Santos Bonacci. And so the cosmic egg theory is something that really resonates with me because that takes it beyond, it's flat, there's a dome, they're hiding God. I mean, that was basically the elevator speech for the flat Earth community for a long time. And it still is, to a large degree. But I said, there's got to be more to it. And so when we got into the whole cosmic egg theory, Martin's work, like I said, that really caught my attention.
No, you said a minute ago you learned some things about the heliocentric model that you didn't know. That's what was kind of big to you. What were some of those points that you probably learned more recently and just didn't make any sense to you?
Like spherical trigonometry, as an example, right? The trigonometry involved in calculating how much of a curvature you should have over a certain amount of miles, right? Mm-hmm. So I mean, and that calculation is not something that the geocentric or the flat Earth community came up with. That's the math that we're given in school, right? That's the math that we're taught to us. That's mainstream math to calculate curvature. And, so that, and also, when I was traveling on airplanes a lot, we'd be up at, 30,000 feet and I would look out the window, had a window seat, and, the horizon was at eye level. And how could that be? If you're at 30,000 feet and you're on a big ball, you're going to have to look down to see the Earth if it had curvature. And you didn't. I mean, if you look out an airplane window at 30,000 feet, right? The horizon's right there. It's at eye level. So it was stuff like that, water not curving, obviously,
Yeah.
All of that stuff, all of the stuff that we've talked about over the last 4 or 5 years is what caught my attention. But I would say the math piece of it was the bit that really was a convincer for me because I don't live far from the beach, and so we go to the beach, and I would take a pair of binoculars, and and there were ships that you can barely see, and then as soon as you took the binoculars and you looked out over the horizon, whoop, they came in. right? They were there. They weren't over a curve. They were there. So
You
it's
mean
just,
your magic camera didn't lift the boat up over the water?
exactly, the magic camera, the magic binoculars didn't lift the boat up, right? So it's perspective. It's how we see, and so it was stuff like that. And and we're not spinning. Obviously, we're not spinning. And the whole theory that the gravity pulls the atmosphere with us. I mean, that's just a theory. That's just nonsense, right?
Crazy nonsense.
Yeah.
Selective gravity, the most selective force ever. I mean, come on.
Yeah. Well, people will say, they'll try to say, well, it's like when you're in a car and you got the windows rolled up, you don't actually feel the wind. I'm like, yeah, that's interesting. I said, but what happens when you're in a convertible, right?
Yeah.
Right. And you're going at 60 miles an hour or 40 miles an hour. Guess what? Right. You're gonna feel the wind. So all of this stuff was concocted, to explain away the holes that are in the heliocentric model. Now, the thing that people need to understand, though, is that I think the mistake that a lot of people make on both ends of the spectrum, whether it be flat Earth or heliocentric, is that that the heliocentric model is a representation of the ancient mystery religion philosophies. Okay, so what I mean by that is that circles and curved lines are considered divine. Okay, so the heliocentric model, when they talk about Earth being a globe or elliptical orbits, which are curved lines and stuff like that, the people that are giving us what is referred to as scientism, NASA, and so on, this is all Freemasonic mysticism that's given to us, based on the ancient mystery religions. So what they're doing is when I talk about, when I do the McCartney conspiracy, the Beatles, I talk about masterfully speaking. Masterfully speaking means that they say things, but you have to listen to the way they're saying things, because they're actually cluing you in on the truth while it sounds like a lie, right? Or it sounds like a deception.
And you think they have to do that, right? I believe that they have to do that. That's how we give them consent. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, yes, yeah. So the thing is, if you don't break the code, if you don't understand how to interpret how it is they're speaking to you or how they're presenting to you, then there is implied consent, right? So if you don't say anything or do anything, then it's implied that you consent. Now, what I mean about what we need to be careful about is, so if we take a look at the cosmic egg theory as an example, we have the Earth is flat; it's a stationary plane. Okay, so it's geocentric, but the Earth has a toroidal field. That toroidal field, this electromagnetic field that we have, actually creates the globe or the circle around the flat plane, the stationary plane. So when NASA tells you that it's a globe, what they're really telling you is that it is a globe or globe-like once you factor in the toroidal field, which is the Van Allen belts, right? So when they talk about the Van Allen belts, what they're really talking about is this electromagnetic toroidal field that goes around the flat stationary plane. When they talk about outer space, they're talking about space outside of our domain, because the cosmic egg theory, and this is from Martin's work, says that we have these concentric rings. So we have an inner ring, we have our ring, and there's a ring after us, which is Martin refers to as the Lemurian ring, and then after that is the Hyperborean ring. Each ring has its own toroidal field. So in other words, it has its own dome or barrier. So outer space would be the space outside of our domain or our concentric ring, right? Extraterrestrial only means extra land. That's all it means, more land. So when they talk to us about this stuff, they talk about aliens, right? Well, aliens would be beings that are outside our concentric ring, which Martin refers to as the Atlantean ring, right? And the inside ring would be the Aryan ring. So anyway, I mean, not to get too much into this, and Martin is a much better person to talk to about this than I am. But the point I'm trying to make is that I believe we have to be more open to understanding that it's not this black and white thing. That's the trap that a lot of people fall into. They want to put it in this bucket here or that bucket there, and we have to understand that in this reality, the controllers, everything they do, they are speaking in ways that are encoded. And once we get an idea or some semblance of how to decode the way they speak to us, we will have a better understanding of what this reality is really all about, and stuff like that. So I know I went on for a little bit there, but I hope it made sense.
Oh, no, that's good. And I want to, speaking of consent, I want to talk about the ISS for a minute and my view on the ISS versus what a lot of people think. And I want to know what your thought is. We see the ISS. I mean, I started looking at the ISS, I think, in 2013. By 2014, I knew it was junk. Complete garbage. The footage is junk. It's terrible. I mean, after looking at 9/11 fakery, looking at the ISS, I mean, it's a joke. That being said, though, there's a lot of people that'll break down the ISS footage, talk about the different glitches and the wire harnesses and the green screens and the obvious graphics presenting themselves, augmented reality, and all that. And everybody talks about them making so many mistakes. I think it's on purpose, Mike. And I don't think it's whistleblowers. I think this is part of the consent thing. Because in my opinion, first off, you're on a space station. Why does so much footage need to be filmed live? Nobody's ever going to know, other than maybe a few live calls that they say they're doing, if they're even doing that. But you wouldn't need to put it live, which means it's recorded, which means it goes through post-production, which means they know the mistakes are there and they put it out on purpose. In my opinion, I'm just going to go off for a minute. I'm sorry. But my opinion is, the reason they put those in there, besides the consent, is what's going to happen, Mike, if I walk out in the living room right now and go to my cousin who just got home and I show him wire harnesses and green screen, it's not going to matter to him. I could show him the Tesla car in space. It's not going to matter to him. But what does it do? Me, you, Karen, David Weiss, Awakened Saint who's here now, everybody in the room is going to jump on YouTube, Facebook, and all these platforms, talk about this fakery, and they're going to monitor it, obviously. They're going to monitor it, and then they're going to see where to gear their next PSYOP, how to adjust the barometer. What do you think about that idea?
Well, I think that that's true, and I think it has another purpose. I don't believe that these so-called mistakes are mistakes. They're put out there intentionally. I think, number one, it is part of the process of them basically showing you, for those that are awake, that, hey, you got it right, that this is not what most people think it is. On the other hand, they can certainly be using it as a way to, as a barometer to figure out what to do next as far as steering the consciousness that I talked about before, right? So it's kind of like putting a trial balloon up and floating it up out there and seeing, which way it blows. So I think it's twofold. I think number one is that because it's, I do believe that they believe they have an obligation in a very strange way to clue us in on the truth. And only those that have eyes to see and ears to hear and are awake will see it. And then for everybody else, it's a way to steer them down a road that they want them to go down. And there's another piece of this too, Brian, that I think comes into play. And this is controversial for some people in the truth community.
I like controversy in the truth community.
Well,
if we're sparking interest, not to fight with people, but if we're sparking people to think a different way, that's good.
Yeah, I think that there's a process underway to make things so comical and to make things so absurd that more and more people will wake up. So what this says is that I talked about before about the Iron Age, right? And right now, based upon people who do this work, they look at the ages, people who are into astrology and stuff like that. We are on the upswing. So the pendulum now is going from, we're in the Iron Age and it's swinging up into the Bronze Age. But we're in a transition period, and that transition period can take a very long time, hundreds of years. So there is a process underway right now where things are becoming so ludicrous that it's going to force people to wake up, more and more people to wake up. And I've always said this. I said, people really don't wake up until something lands right in their lap. It affects them. It rolls up on their doorstep, right? Yeah. So I think that that's a possibility, because when we take a look at the whole political scene with Trump and all of this stuff, I mean, yesterday, I don't watch this stuff, but yesterday somehow, after I got done watching my movie on my Roku, it said, "Hey, the State of the Nation was on," and I didn't even know that Trump was doing a State of the Nation
Hey,
speech.
don't lie to us. You set up your DVR and recorded it.
I had no idea. So I was going to blow past it. And then this little voice in my head said, "No, Mike, just tune in a little bit and listen to the nonsense, So I turn it on and, there he is, my friend of mine calls him Agent Orange. He looks like he goes to a tanning booth every day. He's got that ridiculous hair. He's got Mike Pence sitting behind him. He's got Nancy Pelosi, who looks like, she's just barely alive. And they're going through the same script, Brian, introducing a military person, introducing some young boy that, to be able to push some educational agenda they have. And it's the same thing over and over and over again. But here's the thing. The point I'm trying to make is it's repetitive. It's the same script, and it's getting more and more ridiculous. And so I'm thinking that at some point, people have to wake up, because I have friends, okay? I'll just say friends, who are starting to question things that I never thought in my life that they would question anything. I just thought that they had their heads so submerged in the cement of the matrix that they would never, ever wake up. And they're starting to ask questions. It's just amazing to me, So I don't know. So maybe there is some kind of process that's going on. What constitutes that process? I don't know, but perhaps.
Okay. Another thing that I want to talk about is labels and division. So when I got into 9/11, I was really deep in it. I mean, people think I'm deep in Mandela effect now. I was even deeper in 9/11, and I say some polarizing things that people don't agree with, and that's fine. That's where my research takes me. But one of them, which is a little more accepted now, is no planes on 9/11. But saying that 10 years ago, especially taking it further than that, like I do, about no deaths, people hate it. But the thing is, I dropped the label of being a no planer. I used to take it with pride. Yeah, I'm a no planer, And then it got to a point where people try to use these labels to like box you in. And then I got into flat earth, and I fell back into the taking a label. Hey, I'm a flat earther. I'm a flat earther. I'm a flat earther. And then and I got in it early. I was in it in 2014 before Mark Sargent and Eric and all these people had the videos. And then I watched all that come up, and I enjoyed a lot of that content. And then you start to see people causing division. People calling everybody a shill. And then what that really made me do is I almost totally stopped looking into flat earth. And I would say around 2016, 2017, I was just fed up with it. And at least in the last 2 years, I've dropped the label and it's not because of people on the outside. Oh, they think flat earthers are the stupidest people. I could give a fuck what those people think. They already think I'm crazy. They thought I was crazy for 10 years now. But it's being associated with people that cause division. So if you say, "Oh, I'm a flat earther," then people say, "Oh, well, that's because you follow Eric Dubé." Well, no, the hell I don't. You know what I mean? What do you think about the people that are causing division? Did it make you step away a little bit? I mean, we've kind of talked about this, so I have an idea a little bit. What do you think about the label of a flat earther, and where do you stand on everything now, and why?
Well, we have to walk away from labels, because these labels are put out there. They're created intentionally. So if we go back to a conspiracy theorist, right, that goes back to the JFK assassination. So that's where conspiracy theorists first got legs, and that label was created, right? And then they label people conspiracy theorists, right? Mm-hmm. And then with chemtrails, that's another label, right? It's geoengineering. So when you start using chemtrails, what happens is, that's another label, and they associate that with, somebody who's a tinfoil hat wearer. But if you talk about,
you're already an anti-vaxxer, all these
right,
labels.
Right. So if you say, well, if you talk about, let's talk about geoengineering, that's real, right? That's something that is discussed in the universities. There's white papers and strategy papers on it and stuff like that. Now, flat Earth is the same thing, right? So flat Earth is geocentrism. That's what it is. And geocentrism is a viable term to discuss a potential model of Earth and, the solar system and the universe and all that stuff, right? So I try to stay away from. People say to me, "Oh, are you a flat earther?" I never answer the question. I'm no, I'm not. You want to put a label on me.
Hmm.
To me, flat Earth or geocentrism is something that is an area of research that I've looked into.
Hmm.
Okay, and I have a belief. Like I mentioned before, I migrate and resonate with the cosmic egg theory. But that's not who I am. That's not my life. That's not, how I'm defined. See, people want to put labels on you because they want to define you. They want to be able to box you in. And the thing is, we can't be boxed. We shouldn't be boxed in, and don't allow it. But there are people out there that's what they're paid to do, right? That's their lot in life, is to create division.
Yep.
And I'm not going to say who these people are. People can determine for themselves
Hmm.
who these folks are. I mean, I have my list of people that maybe at one point that I used to listen to that I no longer listen to. In fact, there's very few people in the truth community and the alternative research community that I spend any time listening to on a consistent basis. Very, very few. And that's because I found the best way to go about this is to go about it quietly, is to go about doing your own work, your own research, formulating your own ideas, maybe testing some of those ideas. And of course, you're going to have groups of people or a network that you could bounce ideas off of. You don't want to do it in a vacuum. But, this whole thing with the truth community, as I said earlier, it's all over the place, Brian. It's all over the map. And there are definitely people out there that are in the business of creating division. There's no question about it.
No, absolutely. And here's my take on it. Like, the flat Earth topic has gotten so big now, and there's so many people working on it that it doesn't even really have to get to the point of you say, "Oh, this person's a shill," and obviously that word has done more damage than actual shills themselves, in my opinion, because everybody in the truth community goes around calling anybody that disagrees with them a shill. It's the most ridiculous thing ever. Well, here's my thing though: if people are intentionally causing division, or they're just straight up assholes, we don't need them. We don't need them.
Right.
Ignore them. You don't need them. There's so many people now putting out great content. Plus, everybody should be doing their own research as well. Just avoid those people at all costs. I will not direct. I'm not going to sit here and name names now, but people know who I feel about certain ways. I'm not going to direct anybody. Even if they came out with a great video tomorrow, if they've done so much damage with the division, I won't send anybody there. I'll send them somewhere else. I don't care.
Yeah. I mean, what I do, Brian, is I don't pay any attention to the people that want to cause trouble, the people that are just very hateful, belligerent, nasty. And I'll tell you, the work that I'm doing, and I'm trying to wrap up on the Beatles conspiracy, as an example,
Mhm.
is so filled with nastiness that it is unbelievable. I thought that the whole flat Earth topic was about as nasty as it could get. I was wrong. Okay, so this thing that I'm working on now, and you have to have very thick skin. But the thing is you just, like you said, just set these people aside, just push them out of your life and out of your circle, ban them, block them, because this is not the type of energy that you want in your life. This is not what you want to connect into. So if somebody has a YouTube channel and you're putting material out there and you're going into your comments section and you're trying to debate these people and you're arguing with them, they're basically they're energy vampires. They're stealing your energy.
Mhm.
They're depleting you, right? They're wearing you down. They're trying to wear you down. And the thing is, don't play their game. Don't play their game. Just box them out,
Yeah.
plain and simple. I've gone on my YouTube channel and I have said very clearly to my subscribers. And by the way, I've gotten a tremendous amount of email and PMs back, people saying to me, "Thank you so much, Mike, for running the channel the way you do." I keep that channel so that the people who are commenting are smart, they're articulate, they're value add. That's it. The dum dums, they're out.
Mhm.
Okay, I don't let the dummies in, and if they try to sneak in, fine. I'll just boot you out. Because what they do is they create these sock puppet accounts, right?
Yeah.
Then you ban them. Then they create another one. Then you ban them. They create. This is the mentality you know that's out there that you're working with, right? Well, the thing is, we shouldn't work with it. Anyway, I'm going off a little bit on a diatribe there, but yeah,
No.
get the non-value add, the people who are the low functioning, push them aside because they're not the ones that are going to move the ball forward anyway.
While we're still on flat Earth, before we get to some of the other topics as well, do you have any theories you'd like to discuss? I mean, you have any theories on the moon or the sun, what they might be? I mean, I know it's theories and it's speculation. You got any ideas? Anything interesting, or you kind of just?
Yeah, I mean, just that the moon and the sun are luminaries. I believe that they are lights. The sun is not this big gaseous ball of fire in the sky, and I believe that you know the sun is our daylight and the moon is our nightlight, and they have different frequencies, and they play off of each other. It's you know it's the duality, and that's pretty much it. I mean, I haven't given it much thought, you know, beyond that, other than the fact that they are luminaries or celestial bodies that emanate life. They have frequencies, you know, and it's possible that might sound weird to a lot of people that they can even be sentient. You know,
Oh, yeah.
we only think of sentience in you know in the terms of a body and stuff like that, and or you know a living animal or whatever. But I don't know, you know. So I mean, like I said before, I don't know what I don't know, but I try to be open to what this creation is all about, you know. So that's where I'm at with the sun and the moon.
Now, we talked earlier about the spiritual journey starting for you really early, way before a lot of the stuff because of the supernatural experiences that you had. Did going through the flat Earth topic change or strengthen your connection to a creator at all, or is it just your connection was already there,
Yeah.
or did it alter?
My connection was already there, Brian, because whether the Earth was round, you know,
Mm-hmm.
flat, a triangle, whatever, to me, creation is self-evident. It all got here somehow, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and so I think people who say there's no creator, or they question whether there's a creator. Well, like I said, I mean, all you need to do is just look outside, go someplace in nature, and you'll see that there is a creator. So no, so I would say that the flat Earth didn't do anything for me spiritually.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
What do you take out of the journey? Because it's a big thing. What did you get out of it? Did it change anything for you? I mean, you already knew a lot of the world was a deception. Now your whole cosmology is a lie. What does that
yeah,
mean to you?
yeah. I mean, it just means that, and I told Oli Damagard this when I had Oli on the show a couple of years ago. Um, Anything worth knowing is a lie, plain and simple. Okay, so if it's worth knowing, you could bet your bottom dollar it's a lie, or there's lies embedded in the story that they're telling you. My takeaway was, to be honest with you,
Mm-hmm.
I just shrugged my shoulders and said, it's another one of these monstrous lies. Just like we go back and we take a look at history, obviously our history is a lie,
Mm-hmm.
right? All the people that are doing work, a friend of mine, Mike Wilkerson, has the Stellium 7 YouTube channel, taking a look back, right? Yeah, I mean, you know, like the mud flood and stuff like this. I mean, look, there's something to all this stuff. And the ability going back to harness electricity without power lines and all this stuff. I mean, there's something to all that. Clearly, Nikola Tesla's work was real. And that was completely, you know, stuffed and taken out by the controllers. So the point I'm trying to make is that the flat Earth wasn't really something that rocked my world. I guess as I went through the process, I just thought, okay, well, it's just another lie. It didn't surprise me,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
It didn't either for me. For me, it was easy. Not I don't want to say easy, but a lot of people, oh, it's so triggering, or I didn't want to look at it. For me, I mean, I came from 9/11 media fakery, and then I didn't see Apollo as early as you, but I knew I debunked the moon landing on the air in 2011. So that's like 9 years ago now.
Yeah.
And then I went through the ISS and satellites, and then it was just like fakery after fakery, fake imagery, governments lying, fake imagery, government agencies lying. It wasn't really that hard for me to take in either. But you know what it did do, Mike, for me? Even though knowing the world is a stage, all this is a lie, the media's fake, NASA's fake already. The fact that the stars and everything are so much closer to me, I find myself, especially in the last couple years, just I'll go outside to smoke and I'll be on the porch, and before you know it, 3 hours went by because I've been staring at the sky the whole time.
Yeah.
And we talked about the sun being sentient, maybe. I think that some of the stars are. I've never read the Bible. I've never read the Book of Enoch, but after talking about this, people say, "Oh, that's the Watchers, this and that." I have one particular star that I feel I absolutely have a consciousness connection to. What do you think about that? You ever have an experience like that? Do you agree with any of that? Do you think you never really thought about that?
No, I absolutely agree with that. Look, the thing is, everything that you see in the sky has a purpose. So the creator just didn't haphazardly construct the cosmology. There has to be a plan. You know, it's planned. So I also subscribe to the fact that there's sentience with what we refer to as stars. Okay. And so, yeah, Brian, I mean, there is so much more to this reality than what people think or believe, that it's mind boggling, you know? And how many people don't even bother to look up at the night sky?
No.
Think about that. You have this beautiful creation above your head, and you can go out at night on a clear night and you could take a look and just take it in. There's times, you know, when you have a full moon, I'll sit outside and look at the moon, you know? It's just fascinating. It's fascinating. And so everything is there for a reason. And part of our job when we come into this life is to go on a path of exploration and discovery. Explore and discover. It's not to walk around looking at your shoes, looking at your phone, you know, watching football games, downing beers, eating wings and stuff like that. I'm not saying every once in a while, you know, you don't take a break and have a good time, watch a ball game or whatever. But people are not taking in the full breadth, the full scope of creation. And, you know, the sky, the night sky, the day sky is part of that creation. So, you know, so I think people need to pay more attention to that stuff. They need to explore it. You know, get into syncretism, the work that Santos Bonacci does and that Martin gets into. Stuff is good stuff.
Absolutely. Mike, can we take another bathroom break real quick?
Absolutely.
All right, guys, top of the hour. You know me, I'm going to take a bathroom break. Be right back. You're listening to The Dose of Reality. Brian Stavely, Mike Williams, My Awakening, episode number 47. And guys, all Mike's links are in the pinned comment below the video. He has a ton of links there. Go check them out, sub his channel, his blog, all that. And we'll be right back. Welcome back. Dose of Reality. Let me just bring up my cameras. False alarm with a break there. Huh? That was quick. I hate when I go to break and people leave. We lost 20 people. We got a good showing tonight. We're in the morning. We got 250 people here most of the show, so that's great. Okay, there's a couple. Obviously, we're going to get into the Paul is dead, Mandela effect. There's a lot of topics. A few big ones we're still going to get into, but a couple of things that people had mentioned that you had done some research on actually got brought up on a show a few times recently, a show of mine, and it's something that I've never really looked at. I've heard of it. I saw like 1 or 2 videos on it, and I actually had a lucid dream that involved it. What's your opinion on this whole black goo stuff? Is that something you can elaborate on a little bit? People told me to ask you about that.
Oh yeah, I did that show a long time ago.
I mean, talk to rookies here. We're rookies on the topic. Tell us about it. From what is it exactly?
Well, it depends upon who you speak to, right? So the black goo is allegedly, a substance that was, introduced into our reality from alien forces, alien beings outside of our reality domain, whatever. And the black goo, what it does is it creates a parasitical effect on the mind. It's like a mind pathogen. And there was an X-Files episode that dealt with the black goo, going back to when the X-Files was on a long, long time ago. And so that I'm trying to remember. This show was pretty old. That it was with Harold Kautzvella, and but that's basically it in a nutshell, And so depending upon who you speak to, they'll have different versions and different narratives with regards to how it was introduced and how it was spread and stuff like that. Some might say that it was a biological weapon that was obviously fabricated in a lab, and it was put out, disseminated into the public, and so on. But yeah, I guess that's about the extent of my expertise on black goo. Whether now the question is, do I subscribe to it? I don't know. To be honest with you, a lot of this stuff that I found, Brian, that has popped up in the truth community going back over the years, some of it to me comes across as just fantastical, and it's good science fiction, if you will.
Yeah.
But we have no proof of this stuff. That's the thing, So in order to believe it, you have to believe it, right?
Yeah.
Which means you have to take it on faith. It's something that you embrace. So that's where I'm at with black goo.
Oh, I just wanted to know. I heard people talking about it. People have asked. I don't know anything about it other than I've seen stuff floated about it out there. I didn't know if there was any legitimacy to it. People say it's programmable. What does that mean?
Yeah, they'll say it's programmable, meaning that it will change the programming within you or me, right? So it has the ability to alter how we behave, how we react, how we think. Right? So, and then others will say that the goo itself is programmable, that it is adaptive. So in other words, it's how they would define, quote unquote, like a virus, right? When they say a virus can morph and it can alter its makeup in order to continue its ability to carry on and survive. So those are the two aspects of that I understand about when they talk about black goo being programmable. It's the goo itself, and it's also its ability to reprogram the human mind.
All right. We'll fast forward a little. The first time I really met you, you had reached out to me to do a radio interview with you, or YouTube, whatever it was, a YouTube interview like this. And this was just about a year ago now. I think it was last February, or it might have been March last year. And you asked me to come on to talk about the Mandela effect.
Yeah.
Now, I want to know why you wanted me to come on and talk about that. And obviously, I know that you are affected. You've seen changes. I want to know what the first one you saw was and what made it pertinent enough to you that you wanted to have me on to talk about it.
Well, because I knew the Mandela effect was real. And you and I have talked about this, right? So just quickly, for those that are listening that hadn't heard the story. So going back a number of years ago, before the Mandela effect ever went mainstream, not only in the truth community, but the Mandela effect now has actually made itself into mainstream types of online websites and such. But I got an email from a good friend of mine, and he said, just read this email. And he didn't say anything else. And it was Jack Hart. Jack Hart's a good friend of mine. He's somebody who's been on my show. He's a great writer. And he says, hey, Mike, take a look and tell me what you think. So I'm reading the article, and it says that some people remember Kirk Douglas dying, and Helen Thomas, and Richard Chamberlain. So I'm reading this, and I'm like, I remember all three of those people dying. And the two that really stuck in my head was Kirk Douglas and Helen Thomas, who was the lead White House correspondent, the old lady that used to sit in the front row. and ask all those questions many years ago. But Kirk Douglas was the one that really bothered me, because I remember Kirk Douglas dying in the 1990s. I remember watching his service, from the cameras were on the outside. And I remember that the building was a white building. And I remember them bringing the camera in on his son, Michael Douglas, who was very upset. He was very emotional, which he would be. His father passed away. So I remember watching this.
Mhm.
And so I read this article and I said, oh, this is ridiculous. He's dead, And I'm thinking to myself, why did Jack send me this? So I go onto the search engine, onto Google, and I type in Kirk Douglas, dying or death or whatever. Doesn't show anything. It shows that he's like 100 years old or something, and they said he's blogging out in L.A.
He's still alive right now. He's like 102.
I know, he died twice. Didn't he? He's supposed to have died. Wait, he was 97, I think, when I did the initial search. Then he died at 100, because I remember he hit the century mark. Am I wrong?
No.
I remember at 100, and now is he still alive now, or did he die again at 103 or something?
I think he's still alive now, unless he died in the last year. And in fact, not only you're not the only one to tell me this. Gloria, who I started doing the show with, a year and a half ago, or whatever, that's one of her first and biggest Mandela, is the same exact one. And she's even described the service to detail like you have.
Yeah, it was very disturbing to me, because I'm clearly expecting to see that he passed away, and here I am paging through page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4 of the search, and there's nothing. And I remember thinking to myself, what the hell is going on here? And Helen Thomas was the same thing, because I worked in New York, and I remember reading, I think it was either the Daily News or the New York Post, and they had Helen Thomas's face splash on the front page, which a newspaper would, because she was the lead White House correspondent, and she had passed away. And then she didn't pass away when I knew she did. She lived on. I think she's gone now. So she died twice. So if somebody says he's 104 now.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Anyway, so I got really intrigued by it. So then I came across your channel, and you were doing some really good work on it. I was watching other channels, and it was basically, I don't know, there wasn't any depth to the research.
Mm-hmm.
They would show examples of stuff, but you got into a lot more detail, and you got into a lot more interesting examples of the Mandela effect. And so that's why I wanted to have you on. I mean, up until I had you on the show, I mean, I knew of the ones that I knew of. And then subsequent to that, there's other ones. Like I remember Hugh Hefner dying twice.
Mm-hmm.
I remember Billy Graham.
A lot of people remember that one. That's a big one.
Yep. And he's not hard, he's hard to forget, because Billy Graham, each time, there was this big elaborate, service that they had for him,
mm-hmm.
being the icon of the Christian religion, and his ties to each president and each administration. So, so they had a big to do when Billy Graham died. So I remember that. And of course, other things like Depends, which is now Depend.
Unbelievable, dude. We made that joke so much as kids. Oh, your mother's so old, she wears Depends.
Right.
And now Depend. Anybody that's listening, Depends never existed. Depend.
Right.
Box of Depend.
The Berenstain Bears, that was one. That was one, because that blew my daughter away. And my daughter, she's grown now, but a couple of years ago, I was talking to her about it, and she's looking at me like, "Dad, what are you talking about?" And I said, "Well, do you remember those books, Brittany? The Beren?" And she goes, "The Berenstain Bears." I said, No, the Berenstain Bears. And she says, "What are you talking about?" So I showed her, and I remember my daughter's face. We were outside her house, it just like went white, and she had the same expression on her face as I had with Kirk Douglas. And, so there are others, when you talked about, I didn't know about this, when you came on the show and you talked about Black Tom.
What do you think about that?
I'm like, who's Black Tom?
Right? I mean, how insane is it to not know about Black Tom? And this isn't, when I say these things to trigger people, guys listening, I'm not trying to call anybody, stupid or anything, but I'm trying
No.
to tell you, I'm trying to lay it out to you. Like, if you're a 9/11 researcher, flat Earth, all these topics, the idea that you wouldn't know about the first terror attack on the United States soil, with the Statue of Liberty's damage and all this, I mean, it's completely ridiculous.
Yeah.
I mean, it's insane. So either the Mandela effect's real or you're a shit researcher. And I'm not calling anybody a shit researcher. The Mandela effect's real. What are some of the other ones I brought up on your show that you were like, wow, like what is going on?
I'm trying to remember now, but one recently that you brought up was the Drug Enforcement Agency, the DEA, right? And now it's called the Drug Enforcement Administration.
Yeah, nobody's ever heard of that.
No, it's the Drug Enforcement Agency. It's an agency.
Yeah.
How
about the Smithsonian that I just put up? That's an old change, but everybody knows the Smithsonian Institute. All you people do, but it's never existed. So
now it's the institution, right?
Like for crazy people,
Yeah, no, it was the Smithsonian Institute.
What about the JFK changes? Because you said you researched JFK, and there's so many changes.
4 people. 4 people in the car, right?
Yep.
Not 6. Yep. Not 6. So, and I did a lot of, research into JFK. And in fact, I had Robert Morningstar on my show a couple of times. And Robert is he's big time JFK researcher. So, so I was, knee deep in it as far as, just working with Robert alone. We did basically a 2-hour documentary going back about, a couple of years ago, a few years ago. And what's really weird is the footage that I put in, my show changed. I had the original footage in there, and then I went back and I took a look at my own video. I'm like, all right, I know what I put in that video.
Mm-hmm.
And that video changed. And then I went to my hard drive, and because I keep all of the stuff when I do the shows, right? I went back. I'm like, look at it. It changed on my hard drive as well. And so, it's very, very interesting. It's very real. The reasons for it, I don't know. I mean, we were talking about it yesterday. My lady Barry, we were talking about it a little bit on our walk, and I said, it's possible that timelines have blurred. That we have a merging of timelines. The example I wanted to use is I don't know if how many people have watched Twin Peaks 2017, but David Lynch is behind Twin Peaks, and David Lynch is very high up the ladder as far as Freemasonry and all that. So when David does a movie, there's a lot of embedded stuff in there. And in Twin Peaks 2017, he just shows this scene where they did the atomic bomb blast, right? And he showed it had a ripple effect. And I believe what David was telling us was that that the igniting or the setting off of that atomic blast had an effect on reality. And what happened was the reality that existed had a chain reaction, right? The reality that existed went away, and then consciousness had to recreate the reality. But when it recreated the reality, it recreated it in a way that where there were holes and gaps. Not everything was exact. Okay. Again, I'm just giving you my interpretation of what David Lynch, I believe David was showing us in Twin Peaks 2017. Okay. Another example of how I think that timelines can get altered, Brian, is major events that collectively steer consciousness. So the 2 recent ones in recent history that I can point to would be the John F. Kennedy assassination, where the entire world was captured by that event, and also 9/11.
Yeah.
So think of it as a form of magic. Okay. And so I believe what they do is they create these events, and as I've mentioned before, they want to harness the energy of your thoughts and your consciousness, and so that they could steer it and create their own reality, the reality that they want, the objectives and the agenda that they are striving toward. So again, these are just thoughts I have, folks. some of you probably think I'm off my rocker, but it's possible that by doing these types of things, that it has altered the reality to the point where we have this blending or this blurring.
Yeah, and there's a ton of historical events that have changed. I know a lot of people think this is like just Star Wars and Berenstein Bears and all this, but it's not just. And a lot of people agree with what you said about these big events setting off a
Yeah.
ripple effect of consciousness. A lot of people believe that, and I tend to think there's a lot of truth to that as well. But I mean, it's and with the JFK, I mean, Mike talked about the 4 people versus the 6. But the whole thing's changed. I mean, now the Zapruder film was always in color. Now there's sound called the Dictabelt recording that you can hear 4 shots, and they say the 3rd shot determined that there was a second shooter, and they let that stand for 10 years and reversed it. Now, I mean, you talked about your footage, Mike, the Zapruder, how it changed from 4 to 6. And you've seen all these other JFK researchers, and we know a lot of them in the communities. How come none of them ever incorporate into their theories the other 14 or 15 videos of the JFK assassination that I've shown, that nobody's ever seemed to have seen? I mean, that's insane. How could the Oliver Stone film not have used all the other footage? How could every researcher, even guys in the community like Fetzer and all these people that are always talking about JFK, why don't they ever address? They only analyze the Zapruder film. But I can show you 14 or 15 other angles of it, mostly in color. All these people in 1963 had color hand cams now. And that's another thing, too, with this. The technology seems to be going back and back and back. Like with the color technology and the high definition. It's almost back to the 1900s now. I mean, the first Major League Baseball game in color is now in 1948. How did they do the moon landing 21 years later in black and white and get away with it if they had color TV for 21 years? I mean, it doesn't even make any sense.
No, I remember the first color set that we had was, it was in the 1960s, right? I mean, I remember my father coming home with an RCA. And color TV, the advent of color TV was just coming into the mainstream at that time in the 1960s. And I'm talking around 1966, 67, around there, I guess, you know. I mean, color TV back in the 1950s and 40s, no.
Insane. Now they actually created it in the 30s. It went a little more. It didn't go super mainstream till later, but there's a Brooklyn Dodgers game now that was broadcast in color in 1948, which is just there's no way. There's just no way. And then all these other events, like the Hindenburg disaster, now has 60-something survivors, and I mean, it just goes on and on and on. I mean, all these the George W. Bush assassination attempt that nobody remembers in 2006. I mean, George W. Bush in 2006 was the most polarizing guy on the planet, plane, whatever it is, right? Most polarizing guy 6 years after 9/11. Everybody talks about the time the guy threw the shoes at him. That still exists. But now there's this whole thing when he went down to the nation of Georgia where this Russian guy with the Soviet-made hand grenade wrapped in the red bandana that used to be in Bruce Springsteen's back pocket. I know you know that one. On the album, now he has a red hat in his back pocket. He put a hand grenade wrapped in a handkerchief that he supposedly threw at George Bush, bounced off some girl, didn't explode, and then they went down to the nation of Georgia, the FBI or whatever, months later, and they found the guy. They got in a firefight with him. He killed the head of their secret intelligence service, and now he's in jail for attempting to kill George W. Bush. Nobody's heard of it, though. Until I brought it up. Nobody's heard of Black Palm. Statue of Liberty damage so bad, nobody's ever been to the torch yet. I've spoken to tons of people that have been to the torch. Have you had any personal ones? I mean, you know the story about my neighborhood. Everybody on this channel probably knows. Have you had any personal ones that aren't something other people would know about? Any changes or reality shifts that you're aware of that you?
No, not something like locally, Brian. Like you talked about your neighborhood, your town. I haven't had anything like that. No.
And I think I know the answer to this, but before we move on, why do you think it's so hard for people to accept this, to look into it, especially people, you know, a lot of my friends in the flat earth community? I got probably 70-80% of them on board now, but there's some that still fight it so hard. Do you think it's because of what we talked about earlier? They're so trapped in that physical scientific conversation that the idea that reality's changing, they just can't go there? And also, there's a lot of people, I mean, they'll just tell me about, I know we don't want to talk about religion so much, but when I talk about the Mandela effect and I bring up Bible changes, these people will just be like, well, the word of God can't change. And then they won't look. And it's like, okay, I'm going to say it again right now for everybody. There's 250 people here. You guys have all heard the conversations in the flat earth community between the Christian-based and the Christian-based globies versus the flat earthers. They speak about the Bible as being truth. Then they'll go to the 200 passages in the Bible that talk about a fixed, immovable earth and all this. And then they'll be like, well, planets isn't even in the Bible. Well, now planets is in the Bible. So again, all the flat earthers that said planets aren't in the Bible, were you lying? Or is the Mandela effect real? What do you think, Mike? Why are people so hard to accept this when it seems they've come so far in their truth journey and they're willing to throw all the media and government and stuff out? Is it just that whole spiritual thing? They're having a really hard time coping with that? I think that's what it is.
Well, it could be that, but it's like I said earlier, Brian, everybody's at a different, step on the stairway. And, there are people in the truth community that, they carry the ball for 50 yards and, they're really good as, running 50 yards. And then they get to the 50-yard line and they fumble, and I think a lot of people, not some people, a lot of people, they have a concept of reality. And, most people want their reality to be in a box. They want a nice big bow slapped on top of it. And they want to believe that they understand how things work.
Mhm.
And they're comfortable with that. And they want to live within those parameters. And when you come along, or myself or somebody else, and says, hey, you know what? You don't have everything in your box. You've got stuff outside the box that needs to go in. They want no part of it. And, there are a lot of people that just won't look at anything. They'll tell you they did. Oh, I took a look at that. Yeah, I did some research into that. No, they didn't. Because if they had, then they would come to the conclusions of the people that really did do the research. Okay. I'm not saying you or me. I'm saying if somebody's really done deep, deep research into something, and they're explaining how something worked or what happened, and you didn't do anything on it, well, why didn't you do anything on it? One, either A, because it didn't interest you, or B, it's because maybe it's threatening your worldview of how things work, So I bump up against that a lot. So I really don't know if it has to do with the spiritual piece of it. Obviously, if the more spiritually connected you are, you're going to be open to a lot more things. And again, we have to delineate between religion and spirituality, right? As
Totally
I mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
But I just think some people, Brian, they excel in certain areas of truth research, and they're really good at it.
Mhm.
But that doesn't mean they're going to be good at everything in the truth community, or it doesn't mean that they're going to look at everything in the truth community or the truth topics. So I think for some people, it's just, they just maybe don't want to go there. They don't feel comfortable with it. It threatens their concept or their idea of what reality is all about, and so they just move away from it. To me, with the Mandela effect, like I said, I have real life experiences with it. So for me, it's not something that I sit there and say, oh, I think that's a bunch of nonsense. I mean, it affected my life. So I know it's true. I know it exists. But somebody else might tell me like, oh, you're crazy. Fine. Think I'm crazy. I don't care.
Yeah, my problem, and I encounter this every couple of years when another big topic comes up, and it's just like, here's my thing. So I'll have people that have, like you have a following. I have a little bit of a following for a few years or whatever. So people have followed my 9/11 work. They follow my flat earth work. If you've been such a good follower and you thought I was spot on about this or that, why won't you look at the third thing and at least give me enough credit to, oh, Brian's talking about this. He was a smart guy. He was right about this, this, and that. Let me take a look at it. And the way I approach Mandela effect is different than other people, because everybody out there, they want to prove the changes, prove that it's real, and that's great. But I'll take it up a notch. I'm not only going to prove that it's real and try and prove to you, hey, this thing's real. I'm going to target the person I'm talking to and prove that they're affected, because everybody is affected. If you put me in a room with somebody for 5 minutes, I will trip them up on so many. So that's why I get so frustrated, because I know it's actually affecting everybody. Everybody sees the changes, but they're in denial. I mean, everybody knows it was mirror, mirror, not magic mirror. Everybody knows Timmy fell in the well. The idea that they're going to say we're misremembering it, dude, how are we misremembering something that never existed?
Yeah.
Completely ridiculous.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, like I said, Brian, earlier, you could just do what you can do. You put your work out, and it's almost impossible to to get consensus on things. I've had people tell me things like, Mike, I really enjoy your work. I really enjoy your radio shows. But you believe the Earth is flat.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, what? Think about that, right? So this person this person is shutting things down. It's not my limitations because I'm talking about stuff. I'm putting stuff out there. They're limiting themselves by taking a position on something that, they really haven't taken a look at,
No.
and no, they haven't. And the thing is, and people want to argue with me with that too. They'll say, I have looked at it. I've done extensive research. I'm like, you have? No, you haven't.
Right.
No, you haven't. So, when they give you that, that's a bullshit story. Okay. And so, I mean, I don't argue with people. I really don't. And I don't try to poke them. I just kind of like, whatever. And I move on.
Yeah. Well, we're gonna move on from this topic in a minute. But before we do you have any theories on what's happening? And this is, I mean, I look at Mandela as much as anybody, and all I have is theories on what's causing it. What do you think's going on?
The only thing I could think of, Brian, is that going back to what I was talking about, the cycles that Earth goes through, Iron Age to Bronze Age. And again, just a thought is that we are going through a change in frequency. And that change, and what's happening is things are getting maybe a little convoluted, a little more disruptive until things settle out. Right. Which means that, once we swing into the next phase, the next age, we're going to have some unsettling types of things. And so going from one age to another age, I'm assuming and maybe expecting that there's going to be overlap in the frequency. So think of it like this way. Remember the old radios and you tune them in, right? So you listen to your favorite radio station and you would tune into that frequency. And then, if you go down the road or whatever, and you're a little bit out of range, another radio station starts to bleed in. And now you might be getting, two radio stations kind of swinging back and forth, right? Kind of blurring. And that's what I think could possibly be happening. I really do.
Yeah.
So some people want to, they want to say, oh, it's because of CERN. It's because of this. I don't know. Perhaps. I don't know. I tend to believe that a lot of the stuff that we're going through does have to do with natural occurrences in frequency and vibration.
100% agree.
Okay. I mean, that's where I land. And so, again, not everybody's going to agree with that, but we can agree to disagree.
Yep, we can. Okay. Now, I know, obviously, we're going to get into one of your most passionate topics soon, and that's the Beatles and Paul McCartney and all that. But why don't you give us a little bit of your background in music, because I'm sure that would lead up to why this kind of hit you so hard when you thought that there was something fishy going on with the Beatles. I mean, have you been playing music for a really long time? I mean, we can see the guitars in the background. Most of us that know you're a musician, but there's people here that don't. Why don't you tell us how long you've been doing music on your own, what it means to you, and then bring us up to the Beatles and the Paul McCartney conspiracy, and maybe your love for the Beatles during this process up to that, if there was such a thing?
Well, when I was 9 years old, I was already into the Beatles, and I begged my parents to take me to go see Yellow Submarine, which was in 1968. So my brother and I went. I have a younger brother. He's 15 months younger than I am. And so, we went to go see Yellow Submarine, and I didn't know that it was an animation, And actually, I was very disappointed because it really is not a kid's animation. It's very abstract and so on. And there's a lot of Masonic stuff going on in Yellow Submarine. And but I remember getting excited at the end because at the end the Beatles had come out. They did a little cameo. And so I started playing guitar around 14 or 15 years old. And it was because of the Beatles. I mean, I had other bands that I liked. I liked Led Zeppelin. I loved, Jimi Hendrix, and many other bands I used to listen to. The Stones, the Kinks, and so on. I really loved the British invasion. Mm-hmm. And so as time went on, I wanted to write my own music, and so I started writing my own music when I was in my late teens, and so I was doing that, and during the I want to say the mid 70s through the 1980s, through mid 1980, I I was recording my own material. My brother had a studio in his house down in Maryland, a 4-track analog setup. And so, I did most of the songwriting, and but my brother is a very good musician too, as a drummer and a keyboard player, and so we would bang out these songs, and and way back when we did a demo, when I was trying to get the music, get a recording contract, and also or a publishing agreement, and I didn't do a lot of live stuff. I would do like local stuff, very local, because I spent a lot of time writing original music. I was never into doing cover music. It's not something that ever resonated with me until this day. I could play cover music, but I thought, why am I playing somebody else's stuff? I want to play my own stuff, And so, so I went for about, a 10-year period of time where we were trying to get the stuff, get the attention of record companies or publishers and stuff like that. And I had some minor interest in the smaller labels and some publishers. It's very, very difficult to break into that business. Very difficult. The big labels will not take unsolicited material. Like when I sent at the time it was cassette tapes. You'd send them out to RCA Records or MCA and stuff like that. They would return your tape to you stamped, "We do not take unsolicited material." So you had to work more with like local labels and local smaller publishers and stuff like that. And then what happened was, still big time into the Beatles. I always have a Beatle collection of records that is mind-boggling. Maybe I'll get into that in a little bit. But what happened, Brian, was, make a long story short, we all had to go get a job because making no money doesn't pay the bills. So we all went our separate ways, and we all went to go to work. And, I went off to work, and my brother had to go, he got his job and his career, and he went off, and so on. And then I went for a period of time where I was still playing guitar, but I wasn't doing it like on a very frequent basis. And then it wasn't until 2011, again, I'm still playing guitar and stuff like that, and still plugging away. I mean, I didn't lose my chops, that I decided I was going to put my first album out, Leaving Dystopia. Then my second album came out, Hollow Moon. And I'm going to be putting out a third album probably within the next 2 years. But during that whole time period, the Beatles were a major influence. When people listen to my music, a lot of people will say, "Oh, we could definitely tell, it's like Beatles music. It's very Beatlesque." And that's because I studied the Beatles production. I studied how they did the music, how they tracked, and the overdubs and stuff like that. I was very attentive to all that type of detail in the Beatles music. And then, and I knew about the Paul is dead rumor. I knew about that for a long time. In fact, when I was in high school, my high school was very progressive, and they allowed the students to be able to put seminars on and bring in guest speakers. And I had my friend Adam, his brother Doug came in. Doug was a little older, and he knew all the clues. And and then I had Doug come in, and we had standing room only in the classroom. Everybody was interested, and Doug played the tapes backwards, the records backwards, and stuff like that. And it was very fascinating.
Oh, that's a pretty cool thing in school, huh?
Oh, it was great. I was only like, I think that was 1976 or something. And
the coolest day in school, huh? That's awesome.
I was 17 years old, and I'm putting this thing together, so I was kind of like a freaky little kid with going to see Yellow Submarine at 9 and doing this at 17. And then, but I just thought it was a publicity stunt. I thought it was for marketing, to sell more records and stuff like that. And I thought it was just the Beatles being clever and witty. And it was clever and witty, putting all those clues in the songs. And so in 2016, I came upon this book, The Memoirs of Billy Shears. The first edition was on Amazon, and it just popped up, and it's crazy. And so I said, "What is this about?" So I read the little, summary about the book, and I'm like, "Okay, I'll try it. Let's see what it's about." I read the book, and I was very taken back by it. And the first thing that struck me was, there's so much information in this book. It's 666 pages. It's all occulted. Okay, it's all Messiah. I'm serious. Dead serious. 66 chapters, 666 pages. But But Brian, the amount of information in the book, the detail, I said to myself, putting my logical cap on, could only come from somebody who had very detailed firsthand knowledge of what went on during the Beatle timeline. And
Now,
so
what was the book presented as? Like an insider's view to the Beatles, a view at a conspiracy to do with the Beatles. I'm just a Beatles fan. Here's my story. What exactly was the memoirs of Billy Shears supposedly putting out? I know you might have interpreted it another way, but what was the basis of the book?
it's the basis of the book. First of all, it says right up front, it's historical fiction. Okay.
Mhm.
Which means the history in the book is accurate, right? But there are fictional aspects within the book. And the reason why, to explain to people why there are fictional aspects, is because the person who replaced Paul McCartney, Billy, he has signed all kinds of secrecy agreements like non-disclosures and confidentiality agreements. And in order to be able to not breach those agreements, he has to have fictional aspects of the book in order to protect his contractual obligations. Okay. But the way the book is presented is the memoirs of Billy Shears. So Billy Shears is the name that we are given on a Sgt. Pepper album. After the lead track, Sgt. Pepper, they introduce Billy Shears, and then Ringo sings "With a Little Help from My Friends." So the way the book is presented is it is the memoirs of this person who calls himself Billy Shears. Now, when Sgt. Pepper first came out, people thought Billy Shears was just a name that in the song, and that perhaps it was something that had to do with Ringo, but it turns out that no, it's not. Billy Shears is the guy who replaced biological Paul McCartney, and he was introducing himself because the first album that he played on as a Beatle was Sgt. Pepper. From the first 7 albums, from Please Please Me through Revolver, that was biological Paul, and then starting in 1967 with Sgt. Pepper forward to this day, it's Billy. He was the primary replacement. So that's how the book was presented. And so the book goes on to start from the very beginning, and it takes you right through, the timeline of what happened. And so you do have to take time to discern what could possibly be the fictional aspects of the book, but the vast majority of the book, a vast majority of it is truthful.
So you ordered the book off Amazon, you read it, and then what did you do?
I was having a conversation with Sophia Smallstorm, and we were having an offline conversation on Skype, and I said to her, "Hey, I'm reading this book. It's like really wild, And I told her about it, and she says, "Oh, you have to come on my show and talk about it." And I said, "Yeah, I don't think I want to do that." And I really wasn't interested in doing that. I just wanted to read the book, First of all, one of the reasons why I didn't want to talk about it was because how do you boil down 666 pages for a 2-hour conversation? I knew in order to do that, I would have to do an enormous amount of work to get it, streamlined.
A whole series of shows or whatever. Not
Jesus, I mean, how could you do that in 2 hours,
It's 3 years later, 4 years later, and you still haven't got it all out.
No, exactly. So what happened was I did the show with Sophia, and I figured that would be it. Here you go. I'm giving you an overview of what the book is about. And then I got an email from Mark Devlin, good friend of mine. And Mark said, "Hey, would you come on my show and talk about the book?" And I'm like, okay, so I could do that for Mark. He's a friend. So, in fact, on that second show with Mark, I said, this is going to be the last show I'm going to do on it because I don't want to become the Paul is dead guy, And, but then Brian, I don't know what happened, people started contacting me and other researchers, people got interested in it. I got very interested in it because it just was a never ending rabbit hole. It just got deeper and deeper. And I realized that the book was just a foundation. It was just the beginning of this conspiracy. And the intent of the book, Billy, Tom Harriet is the ghostwriter, right? He's referred to as the encoder, but Billy is the person who's telling the story. Tom just happens to be the guy that gets the opportunity to write it down so that Billy can tell his story. It's unbelievable. It really is. And, it's one of these conspiracies that it encapsulates so much. It talks about the pyramid of power. it gets into secret societies, Freemasonry, the Illuminati, talks about Tavistock, mind control, social engineering, talks about the drug culture, it talks about Aleister Crowley, magic, occult, numerology, mysticism, rituals, Luciferianism / Satanism. I mean, everything is in this thing. So anyway, I've been trying to get myself to wrap it up. Long story short. And the final piece of it has nothing to do with the book. The final piece that I'm working on is whether the Beatles wrote all of their own music. Now,
that's what I was going to ask you next. I was literally going to say, I talk about things that trigger people, like no planes on 9/11 or whatever. And man, you told me like people are really mad when you bring up the Beatles didn't write their own music, aren't they? I mean, really mad.
Yeah. I mean, and first of all, the way I position it is, I am not saying the Beatles didn't write any of their own music. What I'm doing is I am saying that I'm asking the question: Did they write all of their own music?
Mm-hmm.
Not saying they didn't write any music. Did they write all of their own music? And so that has set off a tsunami because, look, first of all, the whole thing with the Beatles, by questioning it, the Beatles, for a lot of people, is a religion. They worship the Beatles. They worship the band. They worship individual band members, Paul McCartney, John Lennon. So, when I started getting into this, this would be like me going into somebody's house of worship and saying that whoever it is, whatever God that they worship, is not real or imaginary, or is not who you have been told.
That's how crazy the idol worship is. The idol worship in America and everywhere, done by design. And I'm sure we're going to get into how. Do you believe the Beatles are a Tavistock creation? The
Beatles were a Tavistock creation. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we could talk about that. Yeah. But the whole thing with it being a church, a worship, it's idolizing, man, it sets people off, Brian, like you wouldn't believe. And the vitriol and just the level of nastiness that has come my way. And this is before I talked about asking the question whether they wrote all of their own music or not. I mean, this is before I even got to that part. People were just, hating the fact that I was even looking into this stuff. And then when I said I was going to look into this, boy, it just opened up, the gates to a lot of people just really, really despising the fact that I was even going to question this, because it's a sacred cow. It's a sacred cow. Look,
like they're entertainers. What's the big deal? And I know they're much more than entertainers, and the Beatles are so huge. But in reality, it's like, why are you getting so mad if I'm going to question some entertainers whether they wrote their music? It's like
because it is worship. Look, I worship them. I idolize the Beatles. I mean, my wanting to write music, play guitar, and all that stuff is all predicated on the Beatles. They were by far my favorite band. And so so look, I've had people in the music industry, Brian, people in the music industry for a long time who have said to me, Mike, there are people that don't want this information out.
People in the music industry approached you and said this, like for your own safety type of thing?
I don't know if it's my own safety or it was
just to let you know the shitstorm's going to come if you keep pursuing it type of thing?
Let me know that, there are people that don't want this information out. I was also told by somebody that by releasing this work or doing this work, that it was going to be, it could be disruptive to Billy, the person who's playing Billy Shears, Billy Shepherd, Billy Campbell, because here's how. Memoirs doesn't talk about whether the Beatles wrote their own music or not. It never touches the topic, right? Mm-hmm. Doesn't talk about it. So this is something outside the book. And so the way it was told to me is, the guy that's playing him today, he built his celebrity. Mm-hmm. He built his work on that foundation. He built it on the foundation that the Beatles, right, were these musical geniuses that wrote all of these brilliant songs. And if you go about chopping the legs out or chopping the rungs out from underneath that ladder, this could be somewhat problematic, right? Because the foundation that Billy built his legacy on can now be questioned. Okay. And what I've told people, Brian, is that I'm not trying to convince anybody of anything. All I'm doing is I have a small team of researchers. There's about a half a dozen of us, very smart people. They are comprised of musicians, songwriters, composers, and arrangers, people, that I know, people I'm networked with who have decades of experience. These are the people, along with myself, that are looking into this. And all I'm going to do is present my findings and my research. That's all I'm going to do. Now, I'm going to leave it up to each individual person to believe it or not. I'm not going to try to convince you. I'm just going to put it out there. I'm going to, as hard as I can, as best I can, to do it as neutral and as objective as I possibly can. And I'm using mainstream sources to build a storyline. So I'm not taking some abstract whatever and pulling it in. I'm going to use mainstream articles, mainstream videos, interviews, and stuff like that that's out there, because the clues are all there. The clues have been dropped. Okay. So as an example, in a 1971 interview that John Lennon did with Rolling Stone magazine, there's a number of times where John drops the line, "The Beatles myth." The Beatles myth, the myth of the Beatles myth, right? So what is John talking about? What myth are we talking about? So, I mean, when I read those articles back in 1971, I didn't think anything of it. I just didn't read anything into it. Now that I know what I know, now I'm inspecting John's words a little more closely. You see,
Is that why he was killed?
George Harrison as well. Also Ringo Starr. Ringo Starr dropped a lot of clues.
Why was Lennon killed? For dropping those clues?
I don't know. One of the things in the book it talks about is that Lennon and McCartney, back in October of 1963, whether knowingly or unknowingly, entered into a satanic pact. It's called Death for Success. In other words, you give your life for the success of the band, for your personal success, your fame and fortune, and so on. So one theory could be that, biological Paul was a ritual sacrifice as a result of entering into that pact in October of 1963, and Lennon followed suit, 14 years later. The other theory about John is that he was going to write a book, that he was going to spill the beans, that he had gotten fed up with the everything that had gone on, and he had gotten fed up with the facade, and that he was going to eventually come clean with it. That's the other theory that you'll hear out there. Lennon, in his own way, did drop a lot of clues. And one of the biggest clues that he dropped was a song that he did. It's called "How Do You Sleep?"
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And just go onto YouTube. The song is on YouTube. Look up the lyrics. And the song is a direct attack on Billy. All right. And another song that Ringo did, it was called "I'm the Greatest." And that song is, again, poking at Billy.
So they didn't like the idea. They didn't like the idea of this guy being part of the crew.
It was a very rocky relationship that took place. When he replaced biological Paul and he came in, Billy took over the band. Okay, so Billy became their internal handler, and he was calling the shots. And one of the agreements that Billy had going into this thing was, if I do this, I have total creative control over this band. The Beatles are mine.
I'm sure that put people the wrong way within the group. Oh my God.
Well, and what happened was Billy is a workaholic. So, and he's a perfectionist. So when he got there, he was expecting perfection. and he was expecting very long hours from everybody involved, right? The other three Beatles and everybody else. And Billy was very tight with George Martin. Billy, as opposed to the other Beatles, including biological Paul, is formally trained in music theory. He can score music, read and write. So, you know, he's very accomplished and
Did
he's
he
very
have public
skilled.
work? His work was out there publicly. A guy actually named Billy Shears had music already
No,
before
Billy
he.
Shears. Billy Shears is a pseudonym. It's not a real name.
So what did you trace? Does Billy Shears have a different name that you knew him as that put out published music?
Well, that's the thing, right? So this whole thing is so many bases have been covered, Brian, that this is why it takes so long to uncover this thing. In the book, he tells us his name is William Shepard. Okay. And Shears is a play on the name Shepherd, right? A shepherd, Shears, right? Mm-hmm. However, other researchers have said that his real surname is Campbell. So it's William Campbell. Mm-hmm. Now, we have a member on the team who is actually working on the genealogy and the ancestry as we speak. And it's a very, very arduous task because what I'm told that the team member has bumped up against is that as they go back in time, because what happens is he's dropped clues in memoirs about his family tree. But when you get to certain points, when you back it up, it goes dark. And in other words, those records don't exist. Mm-hmm. And we believe that those records were pulled intentionally so that it makes it very difficult to be able to figure out the lineage. Mm-hmm. Right? So, and we highly suspect, well, I believe it's a given that he is bloodline related to Aleister Crowley. Billy is. But we highly suspect that Crowley was his father. And possibly as a result of one of Crowley's many sex magic rituals. So it's possible that Billy is an illegitimate child, right, as a result of sex magic that Crowley was engaged in on a frequent basis. I know it sounds really bizarre, sounds really absurd, okay, but I'm telling you, this stuff is out there, and I've got some very smart people, looking at this, and I'm knee deep in it myself. So one of the things that we're possibly going to do after they get done with whether they wrote all their own music is to present the genealogy and to present the ancestry as much as we possibly can, because Billy tells us that he goes back to Scottish royalty, back to the bloodlines, blue blood of William Wallace, the famed Scottish warrior and freedom fighter.
He comes right out and says that, or that's where?
Yeah, he tells us that in the book.
Okay.
And also Crowley's bloodline goes back to William Wallace as well. So at the very least, Billy and Crowley, or Crowley, some people pronounce it Crowley, are bloodline related. And Billy tells us in the book that, in the Blue Book, the second edition, which came out in 2018, that he was tutored by Aleister Crowley up through the age of 10.
More like he was raised by the guy.
He says he was taught, to do things backwards, read backwards, and so on. I put a video up where Billy admits to being taught this as a kid. Okay. And so it's really, really unbelievable. And it has very dark aspects to it. And to be honest with you, one of the reasons why I do want to wrap it up is because it is dark. And I don't want to spend my time digging into all of this darkness or this black magic and so on. One of my team members, Richard Balducci. Richard is an expert in the occult. Mm-hmm. And what Richard has unveiled, and he's gone on my show to talk about this. All of the embedded occultism in the Beatles, not just the numbers, it's dates, it's everything. It's everything. And it can get very dark. I've had people who were following the work that have written me and said, Mike, I'm no longer, I love you to death, man, but I can't follow this anymore because I am getting like creeped out. It's too dark. And it is. It gets dark. And, so anyway, I mean, I'm going on and on here, but again, the book is used as a foundational, a starting block, in which it's a springboard to move on to deeper aspects of what really goes on. And, but I'm going to be very happy, Brian, when I wrap it up. Very happy when it's over. I've told my lady this. God bless her heart. She's there with me. She's very supportive. She listens, but it's very wearing. It's something that you can't keep your head in. It's just too much.
Yeah. Mike, can we take 5 real quick and come right back?
Yeah, go ahead. Yep, take 5 minutes.
All right, guys, quick break. We'll be right back. Dose of Reality, My Awakening, episode 47. Mike Williams, and we will be right back, okay? Not even 5 minutes. Welcome back to Dose of Reality. I'm your host, Brian Stavely. I'm here with Mike Williams today for his Awakening interview. Get my camera back up. Mike. Oh, sorry. Hang on. I'm trying to mess with these banners and get that off of my screen. So, when do you think he was replaced? And what do you think happened to the original Paul? And how many times was he replaced? I know that's a lot, so go ahead.
Okay, so biological Paul departed in September of 1966. The date that I go with is September 11th because September 11th is a very important date in the occult. Other researchers will say they believe it's November 9th, which is another version of 9/11. And some even think it might have been August, but I don't go with either of those dates because, like I said, 9/11 itself is a very, very important date in the occult. The narrative says that biological Paul was killed in a car crash. And so he was replaced soon after the car crash. And the person that was brought in was Billy. And, Billy had been in the queue. He wasn't somebody that was just picked up off the street and just placed, said, here you go. You're going to be the new Paul McCartney. I believe it's very possible, having done the research, that Billy was behind the scenes with the Beatles even before he took over. So I think that he might have been one of...
They could train with them, get familiar with the music and stuff, and make sure that was all.
I think it's possible that he was actually doing some of the arranging and possibly even composing of some of the songs, because I mean that's his training. I mean he's like I said, he can compose, arrange. Billy is a wind instrument player by trade, and a piano player, and obviously he could play guitar and bass and all that stuff. He's very, in fact, John Lennon in the Playboy interview in 1980 states that Paul McCartney is a multi-instrumentalist, which flies in the face of the narrative, the mainstream narrative, that biological Paul McCartney was essentially a bass player and a guitar player. So anyway, so the way it worked was based upon, again, my research. Some people might have a different perspective on this, if they're doing research into it, is that Billy became the primary replacement. So when biological Paul, well, before he actually passed away, they had doubles and lookalikes. So they've had doubles and lookalikes since day one. And there's one double that they have that shows up in the Melody Maker Awards. It's September 13th of 1966, I believe the date was. And he's almost a dead ringer for the real Paul McCartney. I mean, he's not like spot on, but it's pretty damn close. It's amazing. And so they had two versions of Paul McCartney. They had a street version and they had a performer version, songwriter version. The musician or songwriter version was Billy. So he was the guy that would go in the studio, he would write the music, and he was the one that took over the reins of the Beatles. The other one I refer to as Street Paul. Street Paul wasn't a musician, but he was an actor. And he was the person that they had put out in the public for public consumption. So
handle the media and all that.
Yes. So photo ops and stuff like that. And the thing was, his resemblance to biological Paul is actually quite stunning. And of course, that was most likely done by the fact that he started off with very, very similar facial features, and then underwent surgery, plastic surgery, in order to fine tune the facial aspects of his of playing a version of biological Paul McCartney. And so I believe that Street Paul was ahead of Billy in the transformation. Now, Billy also went under a transformation of looking like Paul McCartney. But the people that were involved, Tavistock and the Deep State, that were involved in this conspiracy, they were not concerned about the fact that Billy lagged in the transformation process, because they had Street Paul to be the veneer, the front person, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Everybody that was in the studio knew that biological Paul wasn't there anymore, and they knew the new guy was Billy. So, engineers, producers, and stuff like that, they knew, who he was. But Billy also went through a transformation. And so what happened was they would be running in parallel for a while, Street Paul and Billy, once Billy's transformation got up to speed. And what Tavistock did was, not only was it the two of them, but they also had, obviously, pictures and images of biological Paul, and they had images and pictures of other lookalikes. And they were also doctoring images going way back when, going back to the very beginning, right? So they were always fussing around with images and pictures and stuff like that. So what they did was, when I say they, I'm referring to Tavistock, is they created in the minds of the public a composite image of Paul McCartney.
So it would mix between their alternates, kind of sit in the middle somewhere. So whoever they put out, it would kind of work, huh?
Yes, they've created a hybrid. Okay.
Yeah, I get that.
And so what happens is you don't really notice it, because as time goes on, you see this guy comes out and he says, "I'm Paul McCartney," right? And then, during the later Beatle years, then he goes into his solo career, then he goes into his Wings career, and so on. And so what happens is, people just accept the fact that it's Paul McCartney, because he's laid up against the premise that that's who he is, and he's in a Beatle environment, right? So when he's with the Beatles, who else would he be if he's not Paul McCartney, right? One of the tricks that they did on the Sgt. Pepper album was they changed all of the Beatles. So if you take a look at the Beatles prior to Sgt. Pepper in '67, if you look at the Rubber Soul album, the Revolver album, the albums before that, the Beatles had these mop tops and so on. And then with Pepper, there's a whole different look. Beards, mustaches.
Just throw the wrench in there and throw everybody off, so you're not looking at the one guy, you're looking at all four, and it's...
That's right. And plus, the album itself is masterful as far as the way it's presented, all the colors and everything else. So anyway, so what happened, Brian, was, so people just didn't focus on it. The guy just said he was Paul McCartney, and people would say, okay, well, it's Paul McCartney. But what happened was I did a montage about 3 years ago, three and a half years ago. And I actually took an image or picture of biological Paul. And then what I did was I went along a timeline, and I would take different images of Paul McCartney, person calling himself Paul McCartney. And then what you would see is it is not the same person, right? I mean, it's very obvious. It is not the same person. And it was then that, things started to really pick up a head of steam, because when I started showing people that, when I was presenting that, more and more people would look at those images and say, that's not the same person. What is going on here? You know? So Billy became the primary replacement. So as time went on, I think they phased out Street Paul and Billy took over. When that time was, I don't know. I suspect it was probably in the early 1980s is my suspicion. I could be wrong.
If they mix the images together, like the composites, like you said, right? Wouldn't it make sense that before they introduced Billy Shears in full time musically, that they would implement some of his music in and kind of mix the two together to kind of do the same thing with the music as the imagery? Was there any of that going on?
Well, the music is interesting. We'll deal with the images first. Like I said, the images were all there was doubles and lookalikes that were being photographed, and they were mixed in with biological Paul when Paul was alive. And this was to throw everybody off because, you know, I mean, if it was a ritual sacrifice, then obviously those running this knew the end was going to come at some point, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's how dark this thing gets. So there was premeditated. As far as the music goes, again, this is conjecture on my part, okay? But the complexity of the Beatles' music, especially starting from their first album, Please Please Me, where they're singing Love Me Do, to their seventh album, Revolver, where they're singing Tomorrow Never Knows, and Eleanor Rigby, and and songs like that. The evolution over a span of 3 years is mind-numbing. It is phenomenal, okay? So the question becomes, how did that happen? Was that a natural progression? Did four guys whose whose resume consisted of playing cover tunes in the UK and in Germany, right? Prior to 1962 when they met George Martin, right? No original music,
Mm-hmm.
right, to speak of. If it was, I mean, it wasn't to the quality of, what was being produced. I mean, on Please Please Me, one of the songs on there is I Saw Her Standing There.
So it's like, how did they go from a cover band to not being a cover band?
Exactly. And the thing is that a lot of people don't know is that, biological Paul McCartney admitted back in the 1960s when he was still alive, it was 65 or 66, that the entire bass line of I Saw Her Standing There comes from a Chuck Berry song.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So anyway, the reason why I'm saying this is because this evolution, this jump in musical ability, the ability to write the types of music that was being written, there had to be some help. Okay. Like, I'm not saying the Beatles themselves didn't come in with some songs. If they did come in with some songs, they had George Martin and they had others there, that names we don't know, right? Ringers that would probably listen to these songs and say, it's okay, but you've got to do this, change that, change the bridge, change the verse. The chorus needs to be better. We need to put these overdubs in, so on. You know what I'm saying? Songsmiths, people, professionals, people that know what needs to happen to make a song a hit song. Is it possible that Billy was one of those people? Is it possible that he was behind the scenes, songsmithing, arranging? It's possible, So, but again, like I said, this is something that is, you can't prove it. You can't prove it because nobody has stepped forward yet to say that he was there.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And I know, and I have been in touch with people who have worked with him. And that's all I'm going to say about that. Okay. That's all I can say about it.
Yes, that's fine.
So anyway, it is an incredible journey. And it's not something that I ever expected that I would be involved in. I never started out wanting to be doing this, but there's this little voice in my head that keeps saying, Mike, you are this close to the goal line. Just carry the ball another yard and you're in. And then once you do that, you leave your body at work there, and people could take a look at it or not, and that's that. I would love nothing more at this point in time to move on to getting back to my the shows where I talked about a lot of different topics. This whole McCartney thing and the Beatles thing is getting a little old.
So when you look at the guy, for the people that are listening, I mean, what are some of the things cosmetically looking at him that don't look like the real original Paul, in your opinion? I mean, are his eyes different? Are his ears different? His nose, his height? What's different about him?
Well, his height.
He's obviously very close, but there are some differences. What are they?
Yeah, of course, people say, of course he looks like him, because that was the whole premise, was to do the surgeries, and there's a lot of latex that Billy used, and also fillers to fill out the face, because Billy's face is naturally narrower. It's more of an oval shape. Paul's had more of a round shape, so they had to round out Billy's jawline, his cheeks. I have video of on my Paul is Dead channel where I show latex is clearly in use. So Billy would use latex. I know somebody that played in a Beatles tribute band who told me that they used to get latex in order to help them look more like, the Beatles. And this would be obviously a higher end Beatles tribute band.
Yeah,
The height is the height. Billy is in his prime was about 6 feet 2 inches. Biological Paul's height varies depending upon different sources. Sometimes you'll see 5'9", 5'10", 5'11".
That's a big difference.
Yeah, it is a big difference, and that's why one of the reasons why the Beatles stopped playing live when Brian Epstein announced this back in 1966, before his death in August. He died in August 67. I'm sorry. He announced it in late 1966, I think it was, that the Beatles weren't going to play live anymore because they said the crowds were too loud. They couldn't hear themselves. It was impeding the creative ability for them to write songs and so on. But, that might have been true, because if you tour all the time, the creativity aspect of it does get tamped down. But I believe the real reason was because, if Billy stood on stage, I mean, he's 6'2". I mean, he's 3 to 4 inches taller than everybody else. I mean, Ringo is only 5'8".
Yeah.
So the ears are different. The earlobes are different. It's different nose, different jawline. Those are the primary differences if you're looking at the facial features. So bottom line is he is a taller guy. And by the way, Billy still uses a double today. Okay, so the Paul McCartney that we see today, sometimes when there's photo ops being taken and so on, there's another guy that he has that he employs as a double.
How spot on would you say acoustically he is with the original Paul? Can you tell the difference?
Yeah, you could tell the difference. There was some trickery that was done. As an example, when they released Penny Lane, when he originally sang it, his voice was a little lower, deeper. And so they had to speed the song up a little bit, right? Just speed the tape up a little bit to give him a higher pitch. But Billy is very good at mimicking voices. Mm-hmm. And he says in the book that when he was a session musician, he was hired many times, not only for his musicianship, but he was able to impersonate the voices of other singers, like, famous singers and that type of thing there. So there's times when, if you listen to, as an example, Eleanor Rigby or Yesterday, that's biological Paul. And then you listen to other songs later on, even on Sgt. Pepper, the first album, you could tell it's not the same person. It's close on a lot of songs, but it's no cigar. Mm-hmm. As he got older, or as time, I should say, progressed, I don't say older, but as he progressed, and he established himself as Paul McCartney, and he found that people weren't questioning it. Uh-huh. He loosened the reins, I think, a lot, as far as really wanting to sound spot on, like really, really trying hard to sound like biological Paul. one of the songs that he tells us where he just basically abandoned the whole biological Paul voice was Lady Madonna. So if you listen to Lady Madonna and you go back and you listen to Eleanor Rigby or Yesterday, you could see that, that you can hear that that's not the same person. Also, the live version of Rock Show. If you listen to that, there's the beginning of the song, "Sitting in the Stands of the Sports Arena." That's basically a spoken type of song, and it leads into the Rock Show, which, by the way, has another clue in it, a Paul is dead clue. If you listen to that live, you can very clearly tell that it is not biological Paul. In fact, it almost sounds like somebody from a tribute band singing, So, and again, today when we see Billy, he's at a point today because he is 83 years old now. He's 83. He doesn't care. He doesn't care. In fact, the book is about disclosure. The book is about getting people to finally understand who's been playing the part for over 50 years. Because, it's got to be gnawing at him that everybody thinks that this guy, Paul McCartney, wrote all those songs since 1967 and into the solo career. And it wasn't. The guy that everybody thinks is writing the songs, died 54 years ago. So this is part of the disclosure process. Now, I'm told that full disclosure won't take place until after he passes away, and that there are various projects that are underway, including documentaries that are going to be making their way out. I understand there's going to be a big documentary once he passes away. The movie Yesterday, if anybody has seen that movie.
I definitely saw that, and most of my audience did because of its ties to maybe the Mandela effect. People want to correlate that. So
right.
We have a lot of Beatles fans, Mandela fans. A lot of my audience has seen that movie. Yep.
Yesterday is loaded up with Paul is dead clues. Loaded up.
Really?
Yeah, loaded up. In fact, if you go to my channel, I won't go through it here. It'll take me forever. But if you go to my channel.
You have a breakdown of the movie?
Yes. Somewhere? Yeah. If you go to my channel, you'll see 2 videos I did on Yesterday. And so you can get an overview of some of the clues that were dropped there, some pretty big clues. But anyway, Brian, so, it's, I don't want to go on and on here and bore people to death, but it's.
Well, you're not going to bore us, but I do have one more big thing to do with Billy Shears. You were talking to you and other people talking about this whole 6 toes thing, and people are asking in chat like crazy. A couple other questions that came up, something to do with a walrus. I don't even know what that means. Maybe you can address those 2 things.
Yeah, so we'll talk about the toes at first. So we have pictures of Billy with, we believe it to be Billy. The problem is we don't know whether it's Billy or it's a double, a lookalike with 6 toes.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have videos up on my Paul is Dead. It's Mike Williams' Paul is Dead channel. I think the link is down below. You can take a look. And so I break it down. But we also have a version of Billy with 5 toes, or Billy, a version of Paul McCartney, I should say, with 5 toes. Now, the one thing that Billy has is a condition called hallux extensus. And what hallux extensus is, it's when the big toe, right? Big toe sticks up. You can see this on the Abbey Road cover. Take a look if you have Abbey Road, if you have the vinyl. If you have the CD, you'll have to need a magnifying glass. But if you look at the cover of the vinyl, you'll see that he has sandals on. He's barefoot, and he has his big toe on his right foot is sticking up. And so we have a lot of images of Billy with his toe like that. And so it's still a mystery as to whether Billy's the guy with 6 toes, or is he the guy with the hallux extensus, the upticked big toe on his right foot? Did he have surgery to remove the 6th toe? It's really still a mystery. And to be honest with you, I did those videos, and I didn't want to stick too much with it. I wanted to present it, let people think about it, and move on.
Mm-hmm. Now, is this the cover you're talking about right here?
Yeah. So take a look. If you can see that, it's going to be very difficult to see. But if you take a look at his right toe, large toe, you can see that it sticks up. Okay. And this is a condition, right? And you'll see this in a number of pictures, even when in other pictures when he's barefoot, you can see the toe sticks up.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes he can get it flat. I've seen pictures where he's gotten it, flatter or straighter, but other times it's sticking up in the air. So the walrus, depending upon the walrus goes back to it's occultism, and in some civilizations going back, the walrus was a symbol of death. And so that's why in Magical Mystery Tour, John sings the song I Am the Walrus. So if you open up the album, you're not going to probably have this on the CD, but if you open up the 33 RPM album, it's a gatefold, you'll have the song I Am the Walrus listed, and then it's written in handwriting. It says, "No, you're not," said little Nicole, right? And so that was a clue saying that John, even though he wrote the song I Am the Walrus, wasn't the walrus. The walrus was Paul, because in the song Glass Onion on the White Album, John sings, and here's another clue for you all, the walrus was Paul. So it's just another sign, another clue about another death clue. So there's tons and tons of death clues. They're all over the place. Billy has not stopped dropping clues. He's still doing it.
Mm-hmm.
It's continued on ever since day one.
Do you think it's weighing on him a lot?
I think what's weighing on him, and again, this is just me, if I were in his shoes,
Mm-hmm.
is that I did this entire body of work and nobody knows who I am. Nobody knows who I truly am. Nobody knows who I am.
You can't even take credit for it.
No, you can't take credit for it. And it's really interesting because, I think to myself, even if he did come clean, let's just say, he went on mainstream news and got in front of a podium and said, okay, look, I'm not really Paul McCartney. This is what happened, right? People are not going to believe it. People are going to think, he's such a joker. They're not going to want to accept it because, first of all, people don't want to believe that they could be duped. That's number one, right?
Oh,
everybody thinks they're a genius, right? Everybody thinks they're smarter than the next guy. Yeah. And people are not going to want to hear it. And so he's got himself, in my opinion, Brian, he's got himself in quite a predicament. I don't know. I mean, his whole life was stolen in a way. Of course, his family and his inner circle, and there were people, that obviously know who he is. In fact, I have a clip. Dana Carvey met him, and this is on my page too. And Dana Carvey talks about meeting Paul McCartney, and then he slips during the interview. I understand this interview was never aired. This was kind of an outtake, and he calls him Billy in the interview. And I have another clip where Olivia Harrison, they had the concert for George, which was a tribute to George Harrison. George had passed, right? And so, Billy showed up for that, and he played for the concert for George. And, on the outside, he had met up with Olivia Harrison and George's son, Danny. And as he goes to greet Olivia, Olivia says, "Hello, Billy." Clear as day. "Hello, wow. Billy." And next to Billy at the time, he was married to Heather Mills. He's not married to Heather anymore. He's married to Nancy. And because people have always questioned, did Heather know that she wasn't married to Paul McCartney? Absolutely, she knew, she wasn't married to Paul McCartney. I mean, that clip proves it. I mean, Olivia says, "Hello, Billy," and Heather Mills doesn't blink, right? And by the way, Heather Mills probably has, in all likelihood, some bloodline connections and all that stuff too. I mean, I was going back about 2.5 years ago. I had received an email, and somebody wanted to know if I wanted an entire dossier on Heather Mills. And they said if I wanted it, I could have it. Mm-hmm. And I turned him down. I said no, because, and the reason why I did that, in case anybody's wondering, is because the only people that can have an entire dossier on somebody is an intelligence organization.
Yeah.
And I didn't want any part of that. I don't want any MI6, MI5, Mossad, CIA, FBI stuff. I'm not going to operate that way. So I turned it down. So that's why I never took it, and I never got into the whole Heather Mills piece of it. Quite honestly, I don't really care. I don't view her as a major player in this thing anyway. I mean, she's a stopping point, is my view. So, anything else you want to know about Billy?
No, I mean, anything else you want to put in about the Beatles and the Paul McCartney thing before we transition to the last few questions and get you out
No,
of here?
the only thing I'll say is people will ask me, so, you were so into the Beatles, Mike. What does the Beatles music mean to you today? It's lost its luster. Okay. The aura that was around the Beatles and the magic of the Beatles and all that stuff, it's not there because it wasn't there. It was fabricated. It's mythology. But that being said, I still can appreciate and respect the music, because regardless of who wrote it and stuff like that, whether it was actually one of the Beatles themselves or it was people behind the scenes, the music is still wonderful music. It's still great music to listen to. So that's where I landed with it. But like I said, the luster is not there anymore. So I guess we can move on, Brian.
Yeah, well, I got to work today, so we'll wrap it up in a little bit. But I have a couple big questions for you.
Yeah.
One of them, the questions I always ask people is, so how has this whole journey from 9/11 forward, I guess, affected your family and loved ones? How do they perceive it? Do they think you're nuts? I mean, I know you said your wife's pretty supportive, right?
Yeah.
What about other family members and stuff?
They pretty much don't talk about it. I mean, they know the work that I do, but they don't engage in conversation with it. We just basically look with family and friends. I love my family. I love my friends, and the work that I do is the work that I do, but I don't want to jeopardize relationships. So I respect, where they're at. Whether I agree with where they're at or not is irrelevant. It's where they're at. I'm not going to change them by hitting them over the head with a hammer. That's not an effective way to get people to look at things. So, I just live and let live.
Yeah. Why'd you decide to do this interview today and put it all out here on my channel?
I don't know. I guess because, I thought maybe I really hadn't had an opportunity to really put it all out there. I think a lot of times people have a perspective about who you are based upon, being behind a microphone or whatever, or presenting material. And the thing is that, that's just one aspect of my life. And that's not who I am as a person. I don't define myself as the guy that does Sage of Quay. I don't define myself by the shows that I do. I don't define myself by, being involved in researching the Beatles conspiracy. I have so many more things that I love to do in life. Is, be with family, be with friends, write music, help people, and just, be a good person. That's it. I do what everybody else does. I mow a lawn, I get my hair cut, I do all that stuff. And I think that sometimes people lose perspective on that, and so I thought maybe it was good to be able to get that express that other piece of me for what it's worth.
So I am aware, because you already told me and you did put it on Facebook, you are taking a break from social media. You want to tell people how long that is going to last, why, and then why don't you tell people, because I got a ton of your links below, why don't you tell people what that's all about and any way you want to send people, and then we'll wrap it up for the day.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm taking a break for about 2 months from my personal Facebook page. The Sage of Quay Facebook page will be up and running. All of my social media will be up. But the reason why I'm taking a break is because, number one, I am knee deep in getting this presentation out, the last presentation I want to do on the Beatles. And I find that the whole social media aspect of this thing is it's too disruptive, Brian. And as much as I don't, want to spend time on Facebook and respond to PMs, you've got connections and friends there and stuff like that. And, and if you don't respond and all this stuff, I mean, you also want to be respectful of people, especially if people are genuine and asking you questions, and you don't want to just blow them off.
Yeah.
But I got to the point where I said that it is too much. I deleted all of the social media, Facebook, Messenger, or I took all that crap off my phone. And I did that weeks ago. Best thing I ever did.
Big relief. I heard you talking about that. That's a big weight off your shoulders, I guess is the words I'm looking for.
Yeah, I mean, because people are always reaching out to me. I mean, I cannot tell you how many emails and PMs I get on this whole Beatles thing. It's like I said in the video on Facebook, lack of information is not a problem. I am on information overload with this stuff. I've got more information on my desk right here than I will ever be able to get out on this topic. And so I've gotten to the point where I'm like, I have to just shut it down. I have to just say, look, no more. I've got what I need, and I'm going to take what I have, and I'm going to work with that, and I'm going to get it out. So, so I decided that I needed a break from Facebook. It's, to be honest with you, part of the controlling apparatus is they want us to stay connected. They want us to, to feel like we have to always respond to somebody. We have to react. And I'm like, fuck it. I'm not doing it anymore, And so I'm going to take a break from it.
Good. So I'm gonna wind this down because I got to get to work. But before we do, you gave me a boatload of links. You want to just maybe describe a couple of them? Like, hey, this goes to my blog. Check this out for this. This is my YouTube channel. Blah blah blah. You want to give a quick summary, or you want to just say click all the links?
No, the best thing to do is just go to my hub website, sageofquay.com. That's down in the links below, right? Mm-hmm. So if you do that, then that'll take you to all the other links that are there. Right? You just go to sageofquay.com, hub website. Everything that is down below will be on the website, and you can take it from there.
Awesome. All right, brother. Thank you for coming on and doing the interview.
All right, Brian. Thank you. I spilled my guts, so thank you for having me on.
Yeah, and maybe in another few months we can do something again of some sort. We've done 3 shows now. For anybody that doesn't know, I did one on yours, Mandela Effect. You've done one over here. We talk mostly flat Earth and the Beatles, and now you're awakening. And I think everybody's enjoyed every one. It's been awesome.
It's always fun talking to you.
All right, brother. Thank you so much again.
All right, Brian. Thank you.
All right, brother. Have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Have a nice break from social media.
Yeah, I will.
If you need me for anything, you can just email me. You know where I'm at.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, Mike. Awesome.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye, my friend.
Bye.